straight like that.
For hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit mercenaries for White Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. All labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, "This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot." Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century, their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980 because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum Number 39. The strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so that South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons. This would be done while the U.S. tried to convince Africans that it was on their side. This is from the pamphlet number 39, that Kissinger memorandum. We would maintain public opposition to racial oppression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions without openly taking a position undermining the United Kingdom and the UN on Rhodesia. We would be more flexible in our attitudes toward the Smith regime. And it goes on from there. Guns for hire.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, it's day one, a full day one of the Biden presidency, and already he's done an awful lot. I'll get into some of the details on that in a little bit. In our second hour of our program today, Dr. Richard Wolff is going to drop by. We're going to ask him what the three best stimulus ideas would be that Joe Biden could offer. I have some opinions, and I'll share them with you in just a moment. In our third hour, Dr. Michael Mann will be with us, the eminent, one of the world's best, arguably most famous climate scientists. He has a new book out, but he has been doing a deep dive over the last year in writing this book about who the people are who have been funding climate denialism and just this whole crisis that we have. So we'll get into that in our third hour. But I want to start out with the idea or the sad reality that America is dying. We have been dying for 40 years. Ever since the Reagan Revolution, America has been shrinking. Our role in the world has been diminishing. Our internal politics have been diminishing. Our people have been dying. Our workers have had their pay gutted. Families have been torn apart. America is dying. So where do we start putting it back together? Now, you've heard me rant about various aspects of this for years and years and years, but there's this thing called the rule of threes. You know, typically if you read, and now that I've sensitized you to this, you will start noticing it everywhere. In news stories, in articles, in books, in everything. It's called the rule of threes. And people will say, well, we need health care, education, and a Green New Deal. That's three, right? I'd say, and there's a reason for the rule of threes, that all writers follow it. Many don't even realize they're following it. We even do it in conversation. And that's because it's wired into us. The average person can only hold 4 or 5, maybe at the most 7, plus or minus 2 or 3 things in their mind at one time. And the baseline, the first 2 or 3 of those things are, where am I? How do I keep sitting up straight? What's my environment? That kind of survival stuff. And so really, 3 ideas is about all most people can get their heads around in a hurry. So I respectfully offer 3 steps for Joe Biden and the Democrats in the House and Senate, now that they control both, barely but enough, right? Now that they control both, to go forward. And those are what I just said: education, health care, and the Green New Deal. Number 1, education.
prior to the Reagan Revolution, you could go to, pretty much anybody in the United States could go to college. Louise and I both went to college, and I didn't graduate, but I attended for a short while, and I paid for my tuition. I paid the rent on a little apartment in East Lansing. I bought my own food. I bought a car for $35 and paid the cost of all of it on a part-time job pumping gas at the Esso station on Trowbridge Road in East Lansing, Michigan, and as a dishwasher at Bob's Big Boy across the street from the gas station. That's what I did on weekends to pay my way through school. And I was also working weekends. Actually, I was working at the Esso station more often in the mornings, because at that point in time I was working in weekends as a DJ too, as a part-time DJ. But the point is, and back then the minimum wage was like $3 an hour or something like that. And Louise put herself through school as a waitress, the word of the day, at Howard Johnson's. Right? You could do that. My mother graduated magna cum laude from Michigan State University back in the 1940s. She put herself through school working as a lifeguard summers in Charlevoix, Michigan, and washing and propping airplanes at the Lansing airport on weekends. She also traded that for flying lessons, which is, my mother was quite a person. Anyhow, you could do that back in the day. You can't now. Reagan he looked at education and he said, somebody should be able to make a buck off this. This is the original, this is kind of the official Republican mantra for everything. Somebody should make a buck off this. Let's turn it from being a public utility into being an industry. And as a result, we have 2 generations of young people, 40 years worth of young people. And many of them aren't young anymore. Some of them are in their 60s now. But we have 40 years, we have 2 generations of young people who were not able to start families early like Louise and I did. I mean, we got married, in our early 20s. I was 21 when we got married. I was 26 when we bought our first house. Young people can't do that anymore because they're saddled with student debt. They're carrying around $20, $30, $50, $100,000 worth of student debt. You can't get a loan to do that. You can't move on with life to do that. So number one, we need to do 2 things about education. Number one, we need to make college free, or at least very affordable, so affordable that you can, pay your tuition with a part-time job on the weekends. And number 2, we need to rebuild our primary school education, our fundamental education. Betsy DeVos took a meat axe to this thing, and to our educational system in an attempt to destroy public education and replace it with for-profit education run by other billionaires like her. And we need to fix that. So that's number one. Number 2, health care. We've got tens of thousands of Americans every year who die from lack of access to health care. We have 80 million people who are underinsured and some 40 to 50 million who are uninsured. And in fact, that number is probably much higher. The number who are, I would argue, that 100% of Americans, 340 million of us, are underinsured because we're paying absurd, initial fees, co-payments, the surprise billing. I mean, it's insane. No other developed country in the world does this. Literally none. And none of them are begging for the American healthcare system. And in the meantime, you've got CEOs like Dollar Bill McGuire over at United Healthcare taking over $1 billion with a B. His successor, Stephen Hemsley, took several $100 million. I mean, this is nuts, right? Every penny of that comes from United Healthcare or some other health insurance company saying, no, we're not going to pay for your kid's liver transplant. Sorry. And number 3, we need a Green New Deal. Our planet is dying. But but number 2, we need Medicare for all. I think that's fairly obvious. And number 3, our planet is dying. And it is costing us American lives from, wildfires, hurricanes, tornadoes, derecos, all this kind of stuff. We need to rebuild our physical infrastructure. Our educational infrastructure is our education. Our healthcare infrastructure is healthcare. This is all infrastructure, right? And our physical infrastructure, rebuild our roads, rebuild our transportation systems, electrify our cars, bring our homes up to code, as it were, and give them electric heat and generate electricity and create a whole brand new electric power grid. You know, our original electric power grid was the first early building of it was in the 1890s. Thomas Edison in New York and George Westinghouse. And then Dwight Eisenhower did a major upgrade to our national power grid, as did Franklin Roosevelt. We haven't done anything since then. We are using a 1940s power grid, a 1950s power grid, and it's 2021. It's time to localize it. 20% of our power that we generate is lost because of inefficiencies in the system, what are called line losses and transformer losses. And so we need to be generating electricity with wind and solar and biomass and geothermal, and then using that electricity to drive our cars, to move our trucks, to move our trains, as they are doing in other countries. You know, Norway banned the sale of non-electric vehicles. They've already done it. The United Kingdom is going to do it in 10 years. We can do this. What do you think?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
If you were coming up with the plan for America, what would your first priorities be? Those are my top three. I realize there's a whole bunch of other really important stuff. And welcome back. Buck in Johnson Creek, Wisconsin. Hey, Buck, what's on your mind today?
Good morning. You're talking about a plan for America. And first, I just want to make a comment that Republicans need participation trophies because they can't admit they lost an election. So, you know, we've got to make them feel part of something. But
oh, yeah. Every one of them should get a little plastic trophy. You're right. Yes, you showed up today. I'm with you.
In talking about how to fix things, a while back you made a comment you wish there was a new revenue source for funding our public schools, and it's actually quite easy. That it would be taking people who are collecting unemployment, putting them, if they want to, let them create an employee-owned cooperative, which after paying a living wage, they give a percentage of profits, like 10%, to new job creation to create more employee-owned cooperatives, and 10% to public schools. So over time, you create a pyramid of businesses that give back to the community.
Oh, I like that idea, although the simplest way to do it is to simply say, you know, no longer in this country are we going to fund public education with property taxes. We're just going to ban that. So, you know, which means it's going to end up being paid for with income tax on people, income tax on corporations, and, you know, I don't know, whatever fees states can come up with. But, you know, why not have, you know, the wealthy people of America who keep getting trillion-dollar tax cuts. I mean, Ronald Reagan gave them a trillion-dollar tax cut. George W. Bush gave them $2 trillion tax cuts. Donald Trump gave them almost $3 trillion in tax cuts in total. Why not just say, you know, we're just going to reverse 40 years of tax cuts and go back to a top tax bracket that worked like it did for Dwight Eisenhower and John Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon and Jerry Ford and Jimmy Carter. You know, I mean, we had a whole bunch of presidents during a time when the country was growing rapidly, and you know, why not just, you know, roll back these insane tax things, Buck?
Well, with your way, you're talking about winners and losers. As I try to incorporate it into a business plan, you know, the employees win because they got a good living wage job and nobody's doing anything they don't want to. So it's just food for thought.
Yeah, no, it's good. I like it. Just real quickly, we just have 30 seconds. Real quickly, recap it for me, Buck, so I get it.
For people collecting unemployment, give them the option to create an employee-owned cooperative that in the business plan, after they're paying a living wage, give 10%.
Where are they going to get the money to do that?
Well, I'm doing it with my own personal business, and it'll probably take 200 years before it really has an impact. But if we did it as, like I'm also a county board supervisor, I'm trying to do it on a county level, and if we did it with congressmen and actually, put $5 billion into creating 100,000 new businesses, it would really have a serious impact.
Yeah. Change our incorporation laws. It's a conversation I've had with Richard Wolff a number of times. Buck, thank you. Thank you. Keep thinking. Keep thinking. You're brilliant. It's 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. Stick around. You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. So back in 2018, Bayer, the German pharmaceutical company, bought Monsanto, the American chemical and pesticide company, and, God only knows what else, seeds and whatnot. Anyhow, Bayer bought them for $63 billion. Bayer just very recently set aside $10 billion to cover the cost of consumers, people in their homes, who bought Roundup and got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, cancer, from Roundup, this product that Monsanto makes that Bayer now is responsible for. $10 billion. The kicker is that the home use of Roundup only represents about 10% of Monsanto's sales of this product, glyphosate. It's amazing. There's a whole video about this for the people who support our program over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out over there. The rant that I just shared with you a minute ago, you can find over at thomhartmann.medium.com, which is where I'm posting all my daily rants every single day. So if you want to do a deeper dive on anything you hear, particularly in the first hour of the show, you will find it there at thomhartmann.medium.com, thomhartmann.medium.com. And but there's a couple of other things that I just wanted to bring to your attention. And then, right after the break at the bottom of the hour, I'll pick up all your phone calls and we can have a good long conversation about this. First of all, I wanted to bring you up to date on what Joe Biden has been doing. I think this is really important. And he has invoked the Defense Production Act for the manufacture of coronavirus tests, N95 masks, and vaccine syringes. I don't think he needs to do it yet anyway for the vaccines themselves, because the companies are just cranking as fully and fast as they can anyway. I mean, it's profitable for them. So that's a good start. And then secondly, these are the 17 executive orders that he signed yesterday. This is mind-boggling. He reversed Trump's position with regard to the World Health Organization, put us back in the WHO. That was insane, right? I mean, just, let's get out of the World Health Organization. Yeah, what kind of idiot would say that or even think that? Well, obviously, the idiots that Trump hired. He rejoined the Paris Climate Accord, rather. And, oh, man. One of the, let's see, yeah, here it is. Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz came out. He tweeted something like, does Joe Biden care more about the citizens of Paris than he does of the citizens of America? Like the Paris climate deal has to do with Paris. AOC responds by going, I'll bet you thought the Geneva Accords, that's the injunctions against torture that were negotiated in Geneva, Switzerland. I'll bet you think the Geneva Accords are about Geneva's citizens. It's pathetic. Anyhow, he rejoined the Paris Climate Accord. He has canceled the XL pipeline and directed agencies to reverse more than 100 Trump actions to destroy the environment. This, by the way, I'm reading this from CNN. It actually has a really good summary. He rescinded the Trump administration's 1776 commission, which now, they published this whole thing basically kind of whitewashing slavery and saying it was all justified in the early days and it was just okay and blah, blah, blah. This is, pathetic. But they took it off the website, off the .gov website. And and now there's charges that much of this, it was so poorly done that it was plagiarism. I mean, they just stole it from right-wing writers. Anyhow, that's been reversed. The census. He's reversed the census, the efforts of the census to ignore people who are here without documentation, unauthorized residents of the United States. And, which is important because cities need resources regardless of who's living in the city, and so you need to count all the people. By the way, that's what the Constitution calls for. He reversed the Trump administration's restriction on the 7 Muslim-majority countries, the so-called Muslim ban. He undid Trump's expansion of immigration enforcement. He halted construction of the border wall by ending the national emergency that Trump had declared to fund it. He directed his Office of Management and Budget Director to develop recommendations to modernize regulatory review and undid a whole bunch of Trump's destruction. Regulations are protections for people. They're, billionaires and right-wing billionaires and corporations don't like them, but regulations are protections. He launched a 100-day masking challenge, asking Americans to wear masks for the next 100 days, and mandated them on federal land and in federal buildings. So now when you see anybody in Congress or on TV or whatever, 9 times out of 10, they're going to be wearing a mask if they're on a federal property. He created the position of COVID-19 response coordinator, responding directly to him. He extends the existing nationwide moratorium on evictions and foreclosures until the end of March. He extended the pause on student loan payments and interest until September 30th for another 9 months. It's a good start. I mean, we just need to pay off everybody's student debt, in my opinion. Feel free to debate me on that. But I think I realize it'll help some people more than others, but none of us should have been in this situation in the first place. He issued an executive order preventing workplace discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. He brought back DACA, the Dreamers program, and he extended the deferrals of deportation and work authorizations for Liberians with a safe haven in the United States until June 30th. These are people from Liberia, in particular, were targeted by the Trump administration. Why? They are African. They're Africans. They have dark skin, even darker than the people coming from the southern border. So the Trump administration, Stephen Miller and friends. Oh my God, that's sleazoid. Were particularly hysterical about black people from Africa, so they specifically went after Liberians. It's crazy. But, hey, we're on the right track. We're on the right track. And he's fired 3 of Trump's worst appointees. I'll tell you about those right after the break, and then I'll pick up your phone calls, because those stories are just mind-boggling, who these people were and what they were doing. And then it's your calls for the rest of the hour. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back right after this break.
Our book today is In Defense of Public Service by Cedric L. Alexander. The subtitle is How 22 Million Government Workers Will Save Our Republic. This is from Chapter 1, Civil Servants and Servant Leaders. Unelected public servants are found at all levels of government, federal, state, and local. But the modern model for all is found in the federal employment systems. More specifically, it is in the concept and operation of the federal civil service system, which governs the appointment and tenure of most federal workers. Those who believe that the unelected federal bureaucracy is a deep state covertly dedicated to the overthrow of elected government see the civil service as a fundamentally unconstitutional innovation, a monster of very recent creation. Such demonizing mythology aside, the truth is that the origin of the unelected government is found in the Constitution, under Section 2 of Article 2. The article defines the powers of the executive branch, and the second paragraph of its Section 2 assigns to the President the power to, quote, nominate and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, to appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States, whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for, and which shall be established by law. End quote. Thus, the President has the power to make all appointments not otherwise provided for in the Constitution. These are subject to the Senate's advice and consent unless Congress, by law, vests the appointment of such inferior officers as they may think proper in the President alone, in the courts of law, or in the heads of departments. End quote. In other words, the unelected government, which I have called the fourth branch, is rooted in the Constitution through the powers that it grants either to the President or to Congress. In turn, Congress may grant the President, the courts, or heads of departments the power to hire unelected public servants. In all cases, however, the creation of the unelected government flows from the Constitution, the supreme authority and originating law of the nation. The framers of the Constitution recognized that the elected government of our republic was not in itself sufficient to govern us. It cannot alone get government done. It does not alone possess all the expertise necessary to lead, let alone manage, so vast an enterprise as a nation. If this was true in the late 18th century, it's even truer in the 21st century geopolitical and technological environment that is far more complex, and that therefore requires a cadre of professionals possessing a wide variety of specialized skills, training, education, and experience. The Constitution does not call these appointments and hires a fourth branch, but that is what the federal service and other government workers constitute. De jure, in law, there is no fourth branch of U.S. government, yet it unquestionably exists de facto, in practice, in reality, in fact. Does the fourth branch compete with the three constitutionally established branches? No. It coexists with them as provided for in Section 2 of Article 2 of the Constitution itself. Those three constitutional branches are absolutely necessary to our republic, but they are not sufficient to it, as the framers acknowledged. Moreover, as I've already observed, for most people, most of the time, and in most situations, it is the member of the fourth branch who are, practically speaking, the government. They are the doers. They implement the policies created and interpreted by the three constitutional branches. What is more, although they do not decide or decree policy, they often influence it, not covertly, but by intention and design. The Constitution assigns the Senate the roles of advising on and consenting to most major presidential appointments, but members of the fourth branch do far more advising on a daily basis when it comes to providing the subject matter expertise and feedback necessary to formulate and modify policy decisions. As it turned out, following the coming into effect of the Constitution in 1789, the President, the chief executive, that is, the elected official responsible for faithfully executing the laws, directly or indirectly appointed the unelected personnel whom he deemed necessary to execute government. Most of the agencies in which personnel of the unelected government served were created by the executive branch under Article 2. And for a full 170 years after the Constitution was ratified, the President had the unquestioned authority to appoint and to terminate what were, in effect, employees of his branch, the executive branch. Indeed, in 1789, Congress explicitly voted, by a narrow margin, that it had no authority of approval or disapproval of presidential decisions to terminate appointees. Only those few public positions that were independent of the executive branch, which today are known as independent agencies, were not subject to presidential appointment or termination. In 1829, Andrew Jackson took office as the seventh president of the United States. He was regarded as the apostle of the rights of the common man, and he made it clear that he intended to usher in an area of a more highly participatory democracy. During his 2 terms and under his influence, many states substantially extended the still males-only franchise by dropping property requirements from the ballot and Johnson waged a mighty battle against the second bank of the United States in a successful effort to loosen credit and thereby free up sources for finance. In Defense of Public Service by Cedric Alexander.
On the Science Revolution this week, will AI robots destroy the human race? And why does AI intelligence bond more with the far right? John Noel from Greenpeace USA is here on how he thinks big oil and gas funded the attempted coup on January 6th. Latricia Adams of Black Millennials for Flint drops by saying, finally, charges on the Flint water crisis. It's been more than 6 years since the Flint water crisis began, when the children of Flint were poisoned by lead and by their governor. Plus, in our geeky science, there's a new study out, and guess what? Eating chili peppers could add years to your life and could cut your risk of cancer and heart disease. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. So here are the three highly toxic people that Joe Biden terminated yesterday that Donald Trump had brought into office. And thank God. I mean, the damage they had done already is breathtaking. Michael Pack was fired. He was the head of the U.S. Agency for Global Media. They run Voice of America. Voice of America is hated by authoritarians all around the world. It is absolutely hated. We broadcast in dozens of different languages all over the world, and we have historically broadcast news, just straight news. And Michael Pack took over Voice of America, fired most of the news people, hired a bunch of Trump toadies, turned the Voice of America into a mouthpiece for Donald Trump and for authoritarian government. And he unconstitutionally punished the journalists who were left there, who actually did coverage of the administration. Peck complained in his termination that, in his resignation letter, that his termination will long be viewed as a partisan act. Right? Ass. Secondly, Biden sacked Kathleen Kraninger. She was the head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, that agency that Elizabeth Warren brought into creation. Because as soon as she was put in 2018 by Donald Trump, she immediately started undermining it. She scrapped a rule that the restricted predatory payday lending. She pressured staff to downplay the harm to consumers. She refused to enforce a federal law that protected military personnel from predatory lending. Refused to enforce a federal law that protected our soldiers, sailors, Air Force and Marines. She yanked federal support from military families who were defrauded by lenders. In the middle of the pandemic, she approved a rule that allows debt collectors to harass Americans with unlimited texts and emails demanding repayment. And third, Biden demanded the resignation of Peter Robb. He is in charge of the National Labor Relations Board. He is vehemently anti-union. I believe he's the guy. There was one of the top three people at the Department of Labor was actually the guy who worked for Reagan when he fired Patco people back in 1981. I'm not sure if Rob was him or not, but during his tenure, he tried to limit employees' free speech. He tried to give managers more leeway to engage in wage theft. He tried to hobble unions' ability to collect dues. He tried to prevent employers from helping workers unionize. Wednesday evening last night, he said, I'm not going to step down. And so Joe Biden fired him. Ha! Fired him. God bless him. Anyhow, let's pick up your calls here. Joe in Toledo, Ohio. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind?
Hi, this is Jose. How you doing?
Oh, Jose, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, it does say Jose. My apologies, Jose.
That's okay. I've been called many things worse. Anyway, I guess three things that I really would like to see our country really move towards is, first off, because I'm a teacher and at my job I help kids in their post-secondary education, and how expensive it is for kids to even think about going to trade schools or community colleges, and it's our regular four-year programs. It's outlandish. Basically, working-class kids can't go. I know myself. I started before the Reagan era college, and college was reasonable. It was $225 a quarter, and then by the time Reagan was done, a year into Reagan, I had to quit college and work my way through college in a factory, and it took me years. But that's one thing. The second thing is definitely we should look at the serious overhauling of our infrastructure, because that's something that's going to feed money back into the government. I mean, through taxes and good wages and all the jobs that are created. And you know, about the time that they need to be fixed again, a cycle of maybe about 30 years, there we are again. It's a continuous thing that'll keep feeding our country internally. It makes complete sense to me. I don't know. And then
you're absolutely right. I mean, the Eisenhower highway system has paid for itself probably 1,000 times over, for example.
And then the third thing would be, you know, we have to really deal with this medical industrial complex that's just killing people. Yeah. I mean, it's outlandish. I did a short stay in the hospital this fall, and it's amazing how much money 5 days cost. And I don't see the workers getting benefits, nurses, the people working in hospitals. They're just working Joes. And so, but where's the money going? Of course, to the top. We really have to deal with that issue. And I think a single payer system would really help this. It, you know, kind of put a wedge between the corporate ability to raise prices and inflate situations. That's my input.
Yep,
anyway.
And it's brilliant. Jose, thank you. Solid. Tim in Mattawan, Michigan. Hey, Tim, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good.
Listen, I don't know if this is a good idea or not, but a brain like yours should be able to figure it out. I think they should put an expiration date or a time limit on money. And I'll take my answer off the phone.
Well, explain what you're talking about, Tim. I don't understand. Tim, what do you mean by that?
Well, it'd be hard for billionaires to store their money in a bank in the Cayman Islands and stuff like that if it expired and it was worthless.
Yeah, but it would also be hard for a middle-class family that's got $30,000 in savings, and you know.
Well, hey.
How about instead we bring in Elizabeth Warren's wealth tax and we tax the billionaires 2% on their money bins?
Well, they would think that's so unfair because they're so picked on, you know.
Oh, the poor billionaires. Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely things that could be worked out, like a savings program and stuff like that, or retirement age. But I think it would do a lot towards redistributing the wealth.
Yeah. Okay, Tim, thank you. An idea. I'm going to have to think about that one. Michael in Howe, Michigan, also in Michigan. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Hi. Excuse me, I don't mean to cough in your ear. Hi. What I would like to do is get rid of the filibuster because Republicans, every time the Democrats come up with a good idea in the House, the Republicans immediately filibuster it, and it allows the so-called middle-of-the-road Republicans to hide behind the filibuster and not really have to do anything. The other thing is the Warren...
And Michael, before you get your other thing, if I can... Sure. What you said is so important. And ending the filibuster, if the Democrats want to get anything done in the next 2 years, and the next 2 years are going to lay the foundation for whether the Biden presidency is going to be effective and successful, that is to say, more Democrats get elected in 2022, and we continue to hold the House, the Senate, and the White House in 2024. Their ability to have success is going to be a function of their ability to pass legislation. Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer should be making job one right now, ending the filibuster. And if you want to share your opinion about that with your senator, call 202-224-3121 or 225-3121. Either one will get you there. And ask for each, you've got two senators, all of us do, unless we're from Washington, D.C. Ask for your senator's office and say, end the filibuster. And that's a really important thing to be doing right now. 202-224-3121. Back to you, Michael.
Amen. The other thing is the Warren tax is a good idea, and tell the Republicans that we're so concerned about the deficit that we need to raise taxes on the wealthy to pay for the deficit. and start just hammering away at that argument, so then they can chase their tail for whatever.
Yeah, jiu-jitsu. Use their own arguments against them. I like it. I like it a lot. Thank you very much for that. John in Los Angeles. Hey, John, your thoughts?
Hey, Tom. Great hearing you. Listen, I was following your broadcast this morning, and you said there may not be, anything to do but the second impeachment, which is going to go nowhere. But there actually is. It's Code 8.
We don't know that. You might have been listening to an earlier show or something, John. But if you're talking about
maybe it was earlier. But could I?
Sure. Yeah.
This is what Nancy Pelosi should have did months ago. Or at least when he made the phone calls at Georgia. It's called Code 8, Article 2384, the 14th Amendment. Seditious conspiracy. 2 or more persons in any states or in any place subject to jurisdiction of the U.S. conspire to overthrow, put down, or destroy by force the government of the U.S. or to levy war against them, or by force to seize, take, or possess any property of the U.S. And here's an important part. Or to prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any laws of the U.S. is 20 years in prison.
Yeah, and at the very if you're not going to charge Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley with 20 years in prison, at the very least expel them from the Senate. Another great thing to let your senators know about. John, I'm with you. I'm totally with you. The 14th Amendment should be used against all of these guys, all 147 in the House, all dozen of them in the Senate.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
45 minutes past the hour. Back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option. And welcome back. Jules in Whittier, California. Hey, Jules, you have a green tech idea?
I love your show. I've been studying plasma technology. It's a branch of physics the Russians pioneered in the 1950s. But basically, you take a chamber and you
free ions that are super hot.
Yeah, and you can use it for trash. You can use it for fossil fuels. So I'm thinking, this is something to look into. Biden should have a panel of, get the universities in a consortium and get some experts and have a commission on green energy alternatives. It makes perfect sense because it'd be win-win with the fossil fuels. We could keep using them, to an extent, but they wouldn't be sour on it. And then we could have energy from trash, for example, which is, to me, it just makes a lot of sense. And the technology is not that complex. I've been studying it for 2-3 years now. And I'm not a scientist, but it makes a heck of a lot of sense if we can actually use the fossil fuels without burning them. We're actually using the same. It's like nuclear energy in a way without the byproducts, but you're using the power of electricity.
How do you get around I forget which law of thermodynamics it is, but how do you produce more energy in the process of using plasma than it takes to create plasma? Because typically creating plasma requires massive amounts usually electricity, of energy.
The principle is, like Westinghouse, I believe it is, or General Electric, they're building the chambers right now, big barrels. But principle is you raise the temperature and the electrons start breaking off the atoms, and you have them bouncing around like tennis balls. But there's
I've got that, and they're using that for toxic waste and things like that right now. I get that, but to make it a more general technology, these are insanely energy intensive. This is an insanely energy intensive technology. It's not like nuclear fusion where once it starts, it produces its own energy. Okay.
Let me finish. It's very brief. Yeah. But basically, once it gets to an ionized state, a certain level of ionized state, you run a magnetic beam through the plasma chamber, and what happens? The electrons line up on this beam, and so you're generating electricity based on electrical energy. If I'm standing arm's length from you, and you have a positive charge of electricity and I have a negative charge of just 1% between our two bodies at arm's length, do you know how much energy that represents?
No.
Okay, it's enough energy to elevate the entire Earth. So there's an awful lot of energy that's bound up. When you
skeptical
explode
of
an
that,
atomic bomb, you do it all at once. But in this technology, you do it in increments, you control it, you do it slowly, and there's no byproducts. There's no CO2.
Yeah, but plasma is not nuclear. You're not messing with the bonds between protons and neutrons, which are the really, really intense nuclear force bonds. You're moving electrons around. I mean, our bodies do that. You know, using ionized states.
All you're doing is you're stripping the electrons off the atoms, and you're using the energy, the electrical energy, which is what all of the universe is based on, electrical energy anyway.
Yeah, no, I get that, but the process of stripping the electrons, well, we're out of time. The process of stripping the electrons is so energy intensive. I guess I need to learn more about it. Jules, thanks for giving me a heads up on this. I'll see what I can learn. I appreciate the call. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.media. You know, prescriptions for mood stable. Video this week for supporters of our program, you can find it over at thomhartmann.com. We're talking about endocrine disruptors as modulators of obesity. And this is, in fact, the title of the article in Cell Endocrinology was Endocrine Disruptors as Obesogens. Why is it that almost a third of Americans are obese? And that's not true of, say, Italians. And it turns out there's actually a single measurable, definable variable. There's a category, or actually several broad categories of chemicals that are found in the American food supply in particular places, and therefore fairly easy to avoid, that actually disrupt our endocrine system, our hormone system, and cause us to crave more food, to eat more food, and also downregulate our metabolism so that we burn less energy so that food gets stored as fat. You can check it out at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Daryl in Norcross, Georgia. Hey, Daryl, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, real quick, please tell me, I'm an attorney, and I also teach in Georgia, and please tell me why can't Congress just change the Bankruptcy Act to allow students to just discharge student loans in bankruptcy court? It is the only thing that is not dischargeable. Also, I don't want to forget.
Let me just answer your question, Daryl. Hang on, before you move along. Yeah. You are absolutely right, and that's an absolutely brilliant point, and I should have included it in my rant. That provision that bans student loans from being discharged in bankruptcy was inserted in 2005. And I don't frankly recall who did it, but this was the Bankruptcy Reform Act of 2005 that George W. Bush enthusiastically signed, and sadly there were a few Democrats who were on that too. There were some actual improvements in bankruptcy law, but that was a huge step backwards, and it could be reversed with a very simple piece of legislation, and we should all be lobbying for it. Back to you, Daryl.
Real quick, and thank you so much for that, and I'll call back. We'll talk about some more about that, but I don't want to forgive right now. I know what Biden is saying. That's all good. But, Tom, when you have an infection, you have to clean the infection out before it heals. That's what we have to do. People have to go to jail. Thank you very much, and have a good day.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Daryl, and in fact, that's going to be, in all probability, depending on what the news cycle is, the foundation of tomorrow's first hour, because I really want to do a deep dive on that, and we just don't quite have the time for that right now. Angela in New York City. Hey, Angela, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good.
First of all, Merry Christmas, because it's like Christmas morning. We're getting everything we want.
Yes.
The other thing is, one thing that bothers me, well, some of it. One of the one thing I keep thinking of, I came of age in the 80s, 40 years, my whole life, it's been this. We have a nation of Gordon geckos out there.
Yep.
We have to loosen the grip of the billionaires and the corporations. As the previous caller said, you have to clean out the infection before it starts to heal. How do we get back to a system where we can restore the middle class? And that's one question. The other question is, there's no.
Well, before you get to your other question, let me just respond to that, and I'll hang on to you, Angela. Number one, you reverse 40 years of multiple tax cuts that have allowed the rich to get super rich super fast and have made it, frankly, more difficult because, Reagan raised taxes on working people 18 times. He cut taxes on billionaires, I believe it was 7 times. George W. Bush raised taxes on working people, cut taxes on billionaires. Donald Trump's $1.5 trillion tax cut for billionaires that went into place in 2017, actually from 2021, this year, until 2029, every single year raises taxes on people making less than $70,000 a year to help pay for it, in quotes. We just need to reverse that tax policy. That would be the beginning point. And then the second part to bring back a middle class would be to undo 40 years of anti-union policy, both at the Labor Department, legislatively, and to reverse a series of Supreme Court decisions. Back to you.
Yeah, I agree with you. That is quite a wish list, and I agree completely. But the thing that's really been that I've noticed in the past 30 years is that people are voting against their own interests. They have been, as you've seen. I mean, we still had 74 million people vote for Trump. They consistently do this. It's almost like there's no activism anymore. And that's what bothers me. There's nobody out there. There's no lobby that's helping people like me who are being crushed by student debt. There's nothing happening. And I feel like it's because people have sort of been, hammered down, and it's this dog-eat-dog, everybody's out for themselves. And we really have to start from scratch. We have to start from scratch. We need people who are organizers. We need people who are going to educate people and let them know that they don't have to live like this. Because right now, I'm getting texts from family members who are telling me, "Oh, the communists are taking over," and these are people who don't, who are middle class, and I'm saying to them, "What do you mean by that?" And I'm really frustrated, and I'm tired of listening to it.
Angela, forgive my interrupting, but I'm looking at the clock here, and we're going to get slammed.
Sure.
The problem that you're describing, what's causing this problem, is that you have an Australian billionaire who did this to Australia, then moved to the United Kingdom, did it to the United Kingdom, and now came to the United States. This billionaire, Rupert Murdoch, and started Fox News. These people are watching Fox News. You've got a billionaire-owned network with people who are multi-millionaires. Sean Hannity's a multi-millionaire. Bill Riley, all these guys on Fox News, men and women on Fox News, they're multi-millionaires, and they are indoctrinating average people, and particularly seniors on Social Security, that they need to vote and think in the way that is of greatest maximum benefit to billionaires like Rupert Murdoch and multimillionaires like Sean Hannity. And that's the problem.
We need to fix that. How do we fix it?
Yeah, we do need to fix that. I don't have an easy answer for how to fix it, but I think that, telling your friends you are listening to a television network that is owned by a billionaire that has a bunch of multimillionaire hosts on it telling you how to vote. Do you think that they're going to tell you, give you the straight story? Do you really think that? Angela, I got to run, but thank you for the call. That was a great one. We'll be back. Professor Richard Wolff is with us in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Plexiderm, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. Gabby takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at gabby.com/Tom. HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. And Superbeats, Heart Chews for heart-healthy energy. More info at superbeatsradio.com/Tom.
Book today is Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism and Other Arguments for Economic Independence by Kristen Godsey. And this is from the introduction titled, You Might Be Suffering from Capitalism. The argument of this book can be summed up succinctly. Unregulated capitalism is bad for women. And if we adopt some ideas from socialism, women will have better lives. If done properly, socialism leads to economic independence, better labor conditions, better work-family balance, and yes, even better sex. Finding a way into a better future requires learning from the mistakes of the past, including a thoughtful assessment of the history of 20th century state socialism in Eastern Europe. That's it. If you like the idea of such outcomes, then come along for an exploration of how we might change things. If you're dubious because you don't understand why capitalism as an economic system is uniquely bad for women, and if you doubt that there could ever be anything good about socialism, this short treatise will provide some illumination. If you don't give a whit about women's lives because you're a gynophobic right-wing internet troll, save your money and go back to your parents' basement right now. This isn't the book for you. Of course, some might argue that unregulated capitalism sucks for almost everyone, but I want to focus on how capitalism disproportionately harms women. Competitive labor markets discriminate against those whose reproductive biology makes them primarily responsible for childbearing. Today, this means humans who get pink hats in the hospital and the letter F next to the name on their birth certificate, as if we've already failed by not coming into the world as a boy. Competitive labor markets also devalue those expected to be the primary caregivers of children. Although societal attitudes have evolved in this regard, our idealization of motherhood means that most of us still believe that baby needs mama, a whole lot more than papa, at least until the child is old enough to play sports. Others will argue that unregulated capitalism is not bad for all women. Yes, for those women lucky enough to sit at the top of the income distribution, the system works pretty well. Although women at the executive level still face gender pay gaps and remain underrepresented in leadership positions, on the whole, things aren't too shabby for the Sheryl Sandbergs of the world. Of course, sexual harassment still hinders progress, even for those at the top, and too many women believe that if you want to run with the big dogs, you may have to suck it up and ignore the groping and unwanted advances. And race plays an important role as well. White women do a lot better in aggregate than do women of color. But when we look at society as a whole, on average, women are comparatively worse off in countries where markets are less encumbered by regulation, taxation, and public enterprises than they are in nations where state revenues support greater levels of redistribution and larger social safety nets. Choose your data source, and you find the same story. Unemployment and poverty plague women with children. Employers discriminate against women without children because they might have them in the future. In the United States in 2013, women over the age of 65 suffered from poverty at much greater rates than men and dominated those in the category of extreme poverty. Globally, women face higher rates of economic deprivation. Women are often the last to be hired and the first to be fired in cyclical downturns. And when they do find employment, bosses pay them less than men. When states need to slash government spending on education, health care, or old age pensions, mothers, daughters, sisters, and wives must pick up the slack, diverting their energy to care for the young, the sick, and the elderly. Capitalism thrives on women's unpaid labor in the home because women's care work supports lower taxes. Lower taxes mean higher profits for those already at the top of the income ladder, mostly men. But capitalism was not always so savage. Throughout much of the 20th century, state socialism presented an existential challenge to the worst excesses of the free market. The threat posed by Marxist ideologies forced Western governments to expand social safety nets to protect workers from the unpredictable but inevitable booms and busts of the capitalist economy. After the Berlin Wall fell, many celebrated the triumph of the West, consigning socialist ideas to the dustbin of history. But for all its faults, state socialism provided an important foil for capitalism. It was in response to a global discourse of social and economic rights, a discourse that appealed not only to the progressive populations of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, but also to many men and women in Europe and Western Europe and North America, that politicians agreed to improve working conditions for wage laborers, as well as to create social programs for children, the poor, the elderly, the sick, and the disabled, mitigating exploitation and the growth of income inequality. Although there were important antecedents in the 1980s, once state socialism collapsed, capitalism shook off the constraints of market regulation and income redistribution. Without the looming threat of a rival superpower, the last 30 years of global neoliberalism have witnessed a rapid shriveling of social programs that protect citizens from cyclical instability and financial crises, and reduce the vast inequality of economic outcomes between those at the top and those at the bottom of the income distribution. For much of the 20th century, Western capitalist countries also endeavored to outdo the East European countries in terms of women's rights, fueling progressive social change. For example, the state socialists in the USSR and Eastern Europe were so successful at giving women economic opportunities outside the home that initially, for the 2 decades after the end of World War II, women's wage work was conflated with the evils of communism. The American way of life meant male breadwinners and female homemakers. But slowly, socialist championing of women's emancipation began to chip away at the Leave It to Beaver ideal. The Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957 spurred American leaders to rethink the costs of maintaining traditional gender roles. They feared the state socialists enjoyed an advantage in technological development, and why women have better sex under socialism. Vanished. So that the
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of our program. On the line with us is our old buddy, Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, the co-founder of democracyatwork.info, the author of numerous books. His latest, The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. His other website is rdwolf with 2fs.com. You can tweet him at Prof Wolff with 2fs. And Professor Wolff, welcome back. I'm curious, I laid out in the previous hour my 3 ideas, what I thought were the best stimulus ideas for America, which included are you there, Professor Wolff?
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, I'm sorry. Well, I just had what I thought was a power failure here, which included health care, universal health care, universal free education, and the Green New Deal. I'm curious what your list would be, how you think that America needs to be put back on track.
Okay, I would give you the following 3. Number 1, an immediate federal jobs program. Parallel to what Roosevelt did in the 1930s, we have currently at least 20 million people collecting unemployment insurance. They would much rather have a job. They would much rather have the pay that goes with a job, the self-esteem, the self-confidence. They would like to have the income that will allow them to keep their homes, pay their rent, cover their mortgage, all the rest. And we need that. These are people who could be producing a Green New Deal, providing the daycare that we lack as a nation, providing the services for the elderly who are becoming an ever larger part of our population. They could do these things that we badly need. They want a job, and that's what we ought to be doing. The tragedy is not only that the Biden administration hasn't proposed it, it's that they're not even discussing it. It's as if it never happened in American history when it did, and as if it weren't relevant now, which it urgently is. My second one responds to the overwhelming majority of Americans in poll after poll who believe, and I think they are right, that the level of inequality in this society is not only morally and ethically bankrupt, but is a very bad economic reality that has to be fixed. And here's an interesting thought. If you really went after, particularly a wealth tax, a tax on stocks and bonds, which are currently not subject to a wealth tax, the United States is a bizarre society that subjects to wealth tax at the municipal level, homes, land, automobiles, and things like that, but exempts at the local municipal level and at the state and federal level any tax on the value of property held in the form of stocks and bonds, so-called intangible property. There is no excuse for it. It should be taxed. It would raise an enormous amount of money, which could pay for hiring all those workers and therefore avoid increasing the deficit, which our conservative brothers and sisters now begin, as usual, to worry about. And my third one is the more daring. My third one is to develop a sector in the United States of worker co-ops, institutions that are governed as factories, offices, stores, by workers democratically, majority vote, what we produce, what technology we use, and what we do with the revenue we generate. If that was done democratically, we wouldn't have the kind of inequality we have to correct for now. We'd have a radically different way of organizing business. Americans would become familiar with it, and then we could have informed choice about what kind of enterprise organization we want. These are three daring, yes, but let me tell you, we are in the worst economic collapse since the Great Depression, coupled together with the worst public health disaster, likewise, in a century. So we are in very exceptional circumstances that require a lot more daring moves than what we're seeing from the Biden administration.
So the first of your three was essentially the government becoming the employer of last resort. Is that an accurate rephrase?
Yes, and I think, and by the way, it's exactly what Roosevelt did. That's what the WPA was. That's what the Civilian Conservation Corps. There's ample precedent and experience, both in the United States and in countless other countries, of responding to the kind of unemployment we have in that quick, creative way.
Now, people who are a little more, probably a little closer to the libertarian end of the spectrum, people like Andrew Yang, say instead of the government doing that, it should just give money to people and they'll go out and create their own jobs and they'll start businesses and, you know, vibrance things will follow. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what universe that Andrew Yang lives in. If people are given a lot of money, what they will likely do is go out and spend the money, especially given the amounts of money that we're talking about. They're not enough if you divide them by each person. Let me give you an example of a way you could do something like what he suggests with some hope of it happening. In 1985, in Italy, they passed something called the Marcora Law. Here's what it did. Everybody who became unemployed had two options. Number one, you could get a weekly paycheck like we do here in the country. Number two, completely different plan B, not available ever in the United States. Nor will I embarrass my audiences by asking whether they ever heard about what I'm saying. Anyway, plan B, you could get at least 9 other unemployed, so there would be a minimum of 10. The Italian government will give you your entire lump sum of your unemployment payments that you would have had to wait a year for, week by week. You can get it all right now in a lump, you and at least 9 other people, so a group of 10, on condition that you use the money to start a business that is a worker co-op, which is why Italy has more worker co-ops than any other European country. Yeah. Why not
When was that passed? What was the law?
Marcora, M-A-R-C-O-R-A. C-O-R-A. It was passed in 1985. Marcora is the name of the Italian legislator, who shepherded it through the Italian parliament. Is still on the books. Businesses have tried to block it, but they have failed because there's a big enough left in Italy to prevent it. But by the way, there's the hint. Businesses were opposed. To give people money now is not a breakup of the dominance that particularly mega corporations now occupy. It's very, very difficult. If you had a government program that could not only give the money to help workers start this kind of thing, but could, for example, as already exists in other countries, commit that government orders will at least say 20% or something go to such enterprises, in the same way that we give special consideration to the minority-led businesses or women-led businesses, to level the playing field. The same could and should be done for worker co-ops so that they get this kind of incentive so Americans can learn how they work and make an informed decision. I mean, yes, these are big breaks in our system, but our system isn't working real well, and the burden shouldn't be on us to prove in advance how these things work. There ought to be the willingness to try the kinds of solutions that are adequate in scope and depth to the level of problem we now face.
Yeah, and the idea of basically giving seed money to unemployed people to start worker-owned co-ops is absolutely brilliant. I mean, you and I have been talking about this for what seems like years. Brilliant. Professor Richard Wolff, it is always an honor and a pleasure to talk with you. Thanks so much for dropping by today.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
Professor Richard Wolff. His new book, The Sickness is the System When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, democracyatwork.info, and rdwolff with 2 Fs.com. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolff.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. It's 15 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Oh my goodness here. Nicholas in San Cristobal, Mexico. Hey Nicholas, how's life in Mexico these days?
It was pretty good until you just made me follow Wolff. How can I possibly compete with Wolff? This is terrible.
Hey, his ideas were completely different than my ideas. I mean, anything that, let's put it all on the table. What's on your mind?
Okay, here goes. The first thing I would do, I think, would be to institute a transaction fee for all stock market transactions, you name it, all of the market transactions. A half a penny would raise hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars. There are trillions of transactions every year, most electronic.
And we had that tax from the 1930s until the 1960s. Right. It was called a STET tax, Securities Transaction Excise Tax.
Exactly. And with the number of transactions now, that transaction fee would be infinitesimally small and still raise huge amounts of money. The second thing, free public education, underline it, private colleges and universities, of course, they have a right to compete. But free public education might help to guarantee that we not have an electorate stupid enough to ever vote for someone like Trump again, and help in a million other ways that you understand. The third would be Medicare for all, or some form of universal health care that would allow people to change jobs without fearing the loss of their health insurance, and it does keep them locked into jobs that don't pay enough, don't challenge them in any way, and in no way progress the society as a whole. So those would be my 3 ideas.
That's great. Now, how does healthcare work in Mexico, Nicholas?
It doesn't work all that well, but it does work better to some degrees. There is no universal health care. There's no Medicare for all. There are public clinics. They will help people, but will they get the kind of help if they have serious problems? No, they won't. Some will. Most won't. Pharmacies, believe it or not, here do a tremendous amount of health care. The pharmacists themselves have working alongside them newly certified doctors from the universities in Mexico who have gotten free public education because the country wants more doctors. And what they have to do is, for a minimum of 6 months, they must work they get something like $400 US a month. They live in virtual poverty. And they must work with a large pharmacy, and they must provide free medical health care to all comers. And that helps.
Wow. Now, I think I encountered that. Last March, my family does an annual vacation. Two of my brothers actually, and our kids, and we were on a cruise down in Mexico, and I got food poisoning, and I went to a pharmacy. We got off the ship. I went to a pharmacy. I said, I think I've got food poisoning. This guy comes out. He asks me a whole bunch of questions about exactly what's going on. And he gives me a package of an antibiotic. As I recall, it was amoxicillin. And it cost me like $4. And it was like, oh, how about that?
It works brilliantly well.
So... yeah, that's something that we could import here. Nicholas, it's always great to hear from you, and thanks again for moderating our YouTube channel. It's great having you with us. Nicholas in San Cristobal, Mexico. We'll be right back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. Hey, we have a new video for supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. It's about curing type 1 diabetes, which is a pretty amazing thing. Type 1 diabetes is where the cells in the pancreas that produce insulin are actually destroyed. They're gone. Type 1 diabetics, typically it shows up in childhood. And without insulin, people die from it fairly young. With insulin, they can live a good long life, but a University of Alberta researcher, Dr. James Shapiro, back in 1990 pioneered a transplant system. Now, the problem with that was that people had to use immunosuppressive drugs for the rest of their lives because they had just gotten, a partial pancreas transplant from another person. But now he's successfully on mice worked out a way of actually curing type 1 diabetes. We can't do it legally here in the United States, but they're doing it in Canada. It's amazing. You can check it out at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. 21 minutes past the hour. There's a fascinating tweet that I caught. It was, well, actually, I didn't catch it. It was published by David Sirota in his daily newsletter. It's called the Midday Poster, Poster, and you can track. It's easy to find, or just look at David Sirota. I believe davidsirota.com. But Gabriel Zuckman, an economist, he says some minimum wage arithmetic. U.S. workers produce $75 on average. So the average worker is producing $75 an hour worth of value. Okay? And the way you get to that is you take the total number of hours worked by everybody in the United States and you divide it into the GDP, and what it comes out to is $75 per hour worked. So, obviously some people are producing $1,000 an hour worth of value, and some people are producing $20 an hour worth of value. But the average is $75 of value. The federal minimum wage is $7.25, which is about 10% of GDP, right? Or of GDP divided by the number of hours, of GDP over hours. So if we raise the minimum wage from $7.25 to $15, at that point, your percentage would be around 18%. In other words, producing $75 worth of value would now cost employers $15 rather than $7.50. So where does that put us on the historical scale? This is the fascinating part, the really fascinating part. The last time that roughly 18% of the cost of a product was the cost of labor was 1979. After that, it just collapsed. It went from 18% down to 15% by 1985. It went from 15% down to 13% in 1990. It went from 13% down to 11% in 1998. It went from 11% down to 9% in 2005. And right now, it's about 9%. A little over between 9 and 10%. So if it went back to 18% of the cost of the average cost of manufacturing goods and providing services, we would simply be back where we were the year before Ronald Reagan took office. And in fact, in 1950, when the economy was rip-roaring and Harry Truman was president in 1950. In 1950, it was 30%. Wages represented 30% of the cost of a good. And it didn't kill our economy. So this argument about raising the minimum wage, which is one of the big things that's, I was expecting Professor Wolff to perhaps bring that up. He didn't. But as we're brainstorming how do we put our economy back together, one of the really big things to do that would be raising the federal minimum wage. And, the doom and gloom, the hysteria that we hear from corporations and the billionaires that they made, right-wing billionaires, is, oh my God, if you raise the minimum wage, the economy is going to collapse. Well, they raised it from $7.25 or whatever it was up to $15 an hour in SeaTac, right, outside of Seattle where the airport is. The economy didn't collapse. The local town actually got more prosperous. They've raised it right across the board in state after state. And what happens is when the minimum wage goes up, the states become more prosperous. Why is that? Because employers are having to share more of the value, more of the money that they're bringing in, which represents the value of their goods or services. They're having to share more of that with their workers. And what do those workers do? They spend that money. And what does that do? It produces something called aggregate demand, which is demand for more goods and services, which stimulates the economy, which creates new jobs, which, and now they're good paying jobs. They're starting at $15 an hour. It's called a virtuous cycle. But what just blew my mind is at a $15 an hour minimum wage, we are back where we were in 1979, but it used to be in 1950, it was the equivalent of almost 30%, which would mean that if you wanted a minimum wage today that equaled what it was in 1950, it would be about $28 an hour. I mean, that's pretty mind-boggling when the economy was really roaring. And by the way, and that's because you had a lot of people working in factories where they had union jobs and they paid good union wages, which in today's dollars would probably average $40, $50 an hour. Although all of that has gone. The UAW, in their latest contracts, with the auto workers, they came up with this two-tiered thing where the old guys can still keep their, $20, $30 an hour jobs, but now the new guys are coming in at $12.50 an hour, as I recall. This whole brand new thing. But this is something that needs to be shouted from the rooftops. So anyhow, how do we put our economy back together? What do we do with the worst depression since 1929, since the Republican Great Depression? How do we do this? Your thoughts, my thoughts, we're kind of brainstorming this today. Back with your ideas right after this break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And your calls right after this.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Code Red by E.J. Dionne Jr. It's how progressives and moderates can unite to save our country. This is from the introduction, titled The Opportunity We Dare Not Miss. Will progressives and moderates feud while America burns? Or will these natural allies take advantage of a historic opportunity to strengthen American democracy and defeat an increasingly radical form of conservatism? The choice in our politics is just that stark. This book is offered in a spirit of hope, but with a sense of alarm. My hope is inspired by the broad and principled opposition that Donald Trump's presidency called forth. It is a movement that can and should be the driving force in our politics long after Trump is gone. His abuses of office, his divisiveness, his bigotry, his autocratic habits, and his utter lack of seriousness about the responsibilities of the presidency drew millions of previously disengaged citizens to the public square and the ballot box. The danger he represented inspired young Americans to participate in our public life at unprecedented levels. Tens of thousands of Americans, especially women, have gathered in libraries, diners, and church basements to share wisdom, to organize, and in many cases to run for office themselves. These newly engaged citizens have created an opportunity to build a broad alliance for practical and visionary government, as promising as anything since the Great Depression gave Franklin Roosevelt the chance to build the New Deal coalition. To seize this opening, progressives and moderates must realize that they are allies who have more in common than they sometimes wish to admit. They share a commitment to what public life can achieve and the hope that government can be decent again. They reject the appeals to racism that have been Trump's calling card and the divisiveness at the heart of his electoral strategy. Together, they long for a politics focused on freedom, fairness, and the future. This new politics would be rooted in the economic justice that has always been the left's driving goal, and in the problem-solving approach to government that moderates have long championed. It's true that these camps often battle over whether the nation should seek restoration or transformation in the years after Trump. In fact, our country needs both. To restore the democratic norms we have always valued, we must begin to heal the social and economic wounds that led to Trump's presidency in the first place. Yet there is resistance to common ground among progressives and moderates alike. They often mistrust each other's motives, battle fiercely over tactics, argue over how much change our country needs, and squabble over whether specific policy ideas go too far or not far enough. The moderate says, hey, progressive, you think that if you just lay out the boldest and most ambitious approach to any given problem, the people will rally to your side. Really? For one thing, people may like your objective, but think you're changing things way more than we have to. And we can battle to the death over, say, a Democratic Party platform plank or the first draft of a bill. But without the hard negotiating and compromising that legislative politics requires, a bold idea will remain just a platform plank. That really doesn't do anyone any good. You subject everyone to so many litmus tests that we might as well be in chemistry class. And God save us from your abuse on Twitter if we disagree with you. You lefties have no idea how to win elections outside of Berkeley or Brooklyn, and some of your ideas are so sweeping that they'll scare potential voters away. At this point, the moderate is likely to wield the sturdy old punchline, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. But hold on, says the progressive. You moderates spend so much time negotiating with yourselves that you compromise away goals and priorities before the real battle even begins. Your ideas get so soggy and complicated that they mobilize no one and mostly put people to sleep. Better to have the courage of your convictions, lay out your hopes plainly and passionately, and inspire voters before to join in. Besides, you middle-of-the-roaders were so petrified of Ronald Reagan and the right wing that you caved into the Gipper's economic ideas, let inequality run wild, and gave us a racist and grossly unfair criminal justice system. The extremists have pulled the political center so far right that the only way back to sanity is to show our fellow citizens what a real progressive program looks like. At the risk of sounding like a perhaps unwelcome counselor attempting to ease a family quarrel, I would plead with moderates and progressives to listen to each other carefully. If the events since 2016 do not teach moderates and progressives that they must find ways of working together, nothing will. If they fail to heed each other's advice and take each other's concerns seriously, they will surrender the political system to an increasingly undemocratic right with no interest in any of their shared goals, priorities, and commitments. Moderates are right about the complexity of getting things done in a democracy. Even when the boldest ideas have prevailed, they did so because complex coalitions were built. Important, and it should be said often legitimate interests were accommodated, and some lesser goals were left by the wayside to be fought for another day. Moderates are also right that democracy requires persuading those who are open to change but worry about how this or that reform might work in practice or affect them personally. Think losing their private health insurance. Disdaining as sellouts, those who raise inconvenient questions or express qualms, is not the way to build a majority for reform. Moderates are also right that Americans in large number are tired of politics that involves more yelling than dialogue, more demonizing than understanding. But progressives are right to say that for the last 3 decades, moderates have spent too much time negotiating with themselves. Consider all the effort Democrats put into wooing Republicans by responding to their proposals to amend Obamacare. The book Code Red by E.J. Dionne Jr.
You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. Hey, we just put a new video up for supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com, and it's about what would have happened if back in 1941, when we were attacked by the Japanese at Pearl Harbor, what would have happened if Franklin Roosevelt had said, well, you know, Hawaii didn't vote for me, and it's only 2,404 dead people. I mean, that's not so many, right? What's the big deal? Or what would have happened if my dad, who, you know, joined the Army to go fight in World War II, if my dad had said, well, you know, it's only 2,400 people, and I live in Michigan, and they're way over in Hawaii. They're never going to get to Michigan. That's the poison that is spreading in America right now, that we really need to take on. And so anyhow, that's the essence of this, the new video that we just put up. You can find it over at thomhartmann.com, and I think you'll find it fascinating. Thank you for your support. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Boy, what a day, right? Scott in Charlevoix, Michigan, my mom's hometown. Hey, Scott, what's on your mind?
Hey, I just wanted to get your thoughts on a question I had regarding Professor Wolff's third suggestion on worker co-ops. And I've thought about this for a while now regarding the auto bailout. I had kind of always taken the unpopular position that I wasn't so convinced that we should bail them out, and I thought it was an opportunity to try a worker co-op with the auto industry. I realized
it would have been a very, very innovative way to do it. I mean, you know, if Obama had been, no, we didn't. Yeah, and I'm guessing that a few people brought it up, and perhaps even the union. But that, you know, that could be a default mode. In fact, we should change our corporate bankruptcy laws to insert a provision that the essentially first right of refusal, in other words, when a corporation decides that it's going to declare bankruptcy and lay off their employees, obviously, the first party is not, you know, that can lay claim to the assets of the corporation is not the people that the corporation owes money to. It's its employees. And if the employees can put together a plan that is acceptable to a bankruptcy judge, you know, a viable business model plan to put that company back on its feet, then they should have the first claim to that. That, you know, if I'm integrating your idea with Richard's, you know, that seems kind of cool to me. And I mean, maybe there's a downside to it that I'm missing, but I can't think of one.
Yep. Yeah, I understand it'd be a very complex industry to try to do that with, but I have a lot of faith in the people of our state here and just so much talent. I know people in the industry, from engineers and designers and workers. So, I mean, yeah, I just felt like it was sad that this discussion was never brought up, and we could have had 10 years to be talking about these things.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Scott. Well, you know, it's a new day. It's time for us to start having these kind of conversations and thinking about what we can do going forward and, you know, what's going to work the best and all that kind of thing. Thank you very much for the call, Scott. That was brilliant. Mike in Topeka, Kansas. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Well, I was just calling kind of as a response to one of the callers in said that there was a problem with the people not being able to go to college, and you can go to college. It takes a lot out of you. I put myself through college, but not that it's really important, but I was able to put myself through college by working at a hospital all night long and then going to school full time. You know.
Yeah, but you shouldn't have to do that.
Yeah, see, and that's my point. You know, because it's affected me all my life. I'm retired now, but it's affected my ability to sleep. I don't sleep because my system got so used to being up all those hours. And so we need to find something better. We need to find something better. And if we can give billionaires so many tax breaks and stuff, surely we can find a way to free up enough money to where people can go to college and be able to get out and have a good job and create.
It has been 40 years that. Yeah, it has been 40 years now since Reagan changed the rules of education. It has been 40 years that Americans have been accumulating student debt, and that accumulated student debt right now stands at $1.5 trillion. That's the exact amount of Donald Trump's first big tax cut in 2017, $1.5 trillion. So if you can wipe out 40 years of accumulated student debt, with the equivalent of one Trump tax cut, a second Trump tax cut should be able to pay for 40 years of people going to school. Now, I realize it's obviously not quite that simple, but yeah, I am with you, Mike. I am totally with you, and I think we need to be jumping on this. Mike, thanks a lot for the call. That was a real affirmation. Michael in Long Island, New York. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind?
We need to get rid of the big tech. If you ever want to get back to business and get the country running again, we need to get rid of big tech like Apple, Google, or Microsoft. You know, they control everything. Everything you say, everything you do. They're coming up with this new COVID passport. Does that sound like freedom to you? Everything on the news is nothing but fake stuff. The only place I can get real news, Tom, is from you. You're the only person. You and Richard Wolff. That's it. Everything else is nothing but lies. How can we ever get back to business when they're trying to destroy the American dollar to bring in digital currency? Tell me that.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of digital currency, in particular because, it's created by computers, and companies that have giant supercomputers can just literally make money. I mean, print money all day long, which seems kind of crazy to me. But our news situation is a tough one, and the big tech thing. I'm more or less with you. I get it that Google is in the search engine business. Well, that's fine. But when they bought Nest and they went into the camera business, for your home, so that they can kind of keep track of you, or the thermostat business, it's like, wait a minute, this is starting to look like a monopoly to me. And that's just one example. Obviously, Facebook buying Instagram, Apple, controlling their browser, Microsoft controlling their browser. Each one of these companies should be told, you can run one business, and you've got 10 or 20 businesses now under a single umbrella that are all synergistic. Break them out individually, and your shareholders will actually get wealthier as a consequence of this. This is what we learned from breaking up AT&T back in the day. Michael, spot on. I am totally with you. Pat in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Pat, what's up?
Well, I want to suggest that one thing I'd like Biden to do and change is the rule of using income of your savings are calculated as income. So it happens to the less well-off widows. They've spent their last savings to treat their husbands. They die. 2 years later, they suddenly find that their Social Security has gone down by hundreds of dollars. And it's all because the savings were counted as income.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. We need to change the way that Social Security eligibility is defined. The other thing that I think is crazy is that if you made a lot of money during your lifetime, you get a fair amount of, a pretty healthy Social Security check. A married couple can be getting over $4,000 a month in Social Security right now. And whereas, somebody who just, worked their butts off but never made more than, $30,000, $40,000 a year is going to be getting, less than $1,000 in Social Security a month when they retire. And I just think that's wrong. I think that needs to be that spread that rewards, wealthy workers and penalizes less wealthy workers, I think is wrong as well. But in particular, the penalty on widows. And I see this with my mother-in-law, my wife's mother, who is in her early 90s and doing just great. But, how do you live on those little amounts? It's a tough one. Pat, thank you. Spot on. Marilyn in Sun City West, Arizona. Hey, Marilyn, what's up?
Hey, Tom, thank you for all you do. You were talking, or somebody was talking about Ro Khanna's Bill 5010 that gets the waiver so that states can start their own health care. And once again, I am from Saskatchewan, so I appreciate you mentioning Tommy Douglas, because you are 100% right. Something people don't know, because they talk about the health care system and that the U.S. has the best health care in the world, and I'm not convinced of that. But if you are severely ill for anything, cancer, heart, whatever it is, in Canada, and there is a procedure available somewhere else in the world but not available in Canada, as long as it is a legitimate medical procedure and not experimental, the Canadian government will pay to have that operation in London or at Phoenix Children's or wherever that is. And I know that because my brother grew up in a hospital. He spent half his life in the Canadian hospitals and half his life at the Mayo Clinic in Minneapolis, because at that time it was the best hospital in the world. And my parents never paid a dime.
Wow. And the government of Canada, did they pay for the transportation as well to fly them to Minneapolis?
All of that. There's a little motel called Soldiers Field just outside of Minneapolis where the Mayo Clinic is, and they had accommodations there so they could stay near him. But yeah, they paid the whole, as long as it's referred, as long as you're referred by a doctor.
Right. That's amazing. Marilyn, I did not know that. Thank you for sharing that story with us. It's great to hear from you. Thanks for watching us there, or listening to us there in Sun City West, Arizona.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
45 minutes past the hour is the Thom Hartmann Program, where we dare to ask, is Walmart a person? And we dare to say, no, not a chance. No, neither is Google. And welcome back. Nathan in West Los Angeles, California. Hey, Nathan, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I just wanted to, you had a caller mention cryptocurrency there, and you mentioned that they can make more of it. I think the inherent value of cryptocurrency is that they won't make more of it. There's a limited amount, and there will never be more of it, if I understand it correctly, but I could be wrong.
You are wrong. The amount of cryptocurrency in circulation has been steadily increasing since it started, and the way you mine it is by running very, very complex computer algorithms. And giant companies that have large computers, particularly if they've got large computers that are not as heavily used, say, at night as during the day, like Google, for example. Well, I don't, they're international now, but if they segregated their U.S. stuff, at night there's nowhere near as many Google searches as there are during the day. They could use those computers to literally make money. I mean, manufacture money, to manufacture Bitcoin, and that seems to me like the biggest hole in the whole thing.
Oh yeah, I guess I do misunderstand it. I haven't done a ton of research about it, but in any case, the reason I was calling was to, I think Democrats understand, what the priorities are. They've been the priorities for so long that they're, I think what the Democrats really need to focus on is messaging, because
I agree.
They have all of these mouthpieces that are, in opposition to what they want to do. And Democrats have just never been as good. Progressives have never been as good at messaging as a whole, staying on the same page with each other and getting on the network. Bernie and Elizabeth Warren are
damn good at it, but, everybody else needs to be taking a lesson from them.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and that's what they need to do. They need to get all on the same page and look at the progressives that are doing a really good job with messaging and do that together. And all do it, and do it repeatedly, and do it aggressively, because I think time is short to to claw back some democracy that we've lost.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. Nathan, brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm totally with you. Christine in Ashland, Oregon. Hey, Christine, what's up?
Good morning, Tom. I just wanted to comment on your top 3 hit list. And I also wanted to say that people are smiling in their cars now. When I'm on my walk, there's people smiling. It's wonderful. But my top 3 hit list would be health care is number 1, but you must include in that food and good housing, because hungry homeless people are not going to be able to seek out and carry on with education. So within the health care, you got to have housing and good food, then green jobs, I think, and then after that, education.
Yeah.
But I think they're all very important. But
I completely agree.
Yeah, okay. And thanks.
Yeah, sure. We've largely subordinated housing to HUD and food to the Department of Agriculture, via the food stamp program. Both of those programs, in my opinion, need to be expanded. They've just been, when LBJ rolled those things out, they were actually viable. I mean, you could actually survive on food stamps, and you could get decent housing through housing assistance. Over the years, both inflation and Republican budget cuts have just slashed them to barely get by status, and they need to be restored. Christine, thank you. Important things to add. We'll be right back 10 minutes before the hour. You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. Hey, we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program that talks about the list of things that if Democrats did them, they would never lose another election. And I mean that quite sincerely and quite seriously. And part of the proof of it is that Donald Trump campaigned on a number of these things, and millions of Republicans voted for him because of them. A couple of them, for example, Donald Trump promised he was going to stop crazy trade deals and stop companies from exporting jobs. He was going to force Apple to bring their factories back to America. Well, Democrats need to be talking about this, and they have been forever. I mean, this is Bernie and Sherrod Brown and these guys all with these things. Donald Trump said he was going to give everybody in America health care. He said we were going to get debt-free college. There's a whole bunch of stuff. You can check it all out. It's the new video. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Thanks for your support. Tag You're It. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Sandra in Peoria, Illinois. Hey, Sandra, what's up?
Hi. I'd like to follow up with Dr. Richard Wolff's recommendation for the stimulus with that jobs guarantee program. And who I'd like to hear from more, who we've had on in the past, is Dr. Stephanie Kelton. She's a macroeconomic. Yeah, and she's a great.
She has a new book out, by the way.
Yes, the deficit myth, I think.
Yes.
Anyway, she is or was a chief economist on the United States Senate Budget Committee with Bernie Sanders, and she goes into great detail about this program and how it would establish a minimum wage of $15, and it would work toward full employment. And would go a long way in minimizing inequality and expanding the middle class and closing the wealth gap. So anyway, what I want to say is that I'd sure love to see her on again to go into great detail, and get this, hopefully somebody will pay attention and get it on Joe Biden's list.
Yeah. Amen. Thank you, Sandra. Kenyatta in Los Angeles. Hey, Kenyatta, what's up? I see you published a new piece over at Op-Ed News, by the way. Let me point people to it. What's on your mind today?
Well, thank you, Tom, for that. With regard to your topic today, one of the things that I would really like to see the Biden-Harris administration address is court reform in this country, or legal reform. There is, it's a real problem, Tom. And I know that Donald Trump called himself initiating some type of criminal justice reform, but basically in this country, and this is a country of laws, at least that's the propaganda, and in this country, if you don't have any money, and it doesn't have to be criminal court, you're done. You're done. If you don't have a lawyer, if you get rear-ended and you don't have a lawyer, you're going to get screwed by the insurance company. If you're going to be evicted and you don't have a lawyer, you're going to get screwed. And it's what's really ironic is that both President Biden and Vice President Harris are lawyers, and Washington is full of lawyers. And this is something, and from the criminal justice side, particularly as black people in this country for 400 years are at the bottom of every societal statistic, you end up, if you don't have $40,000, $50,000, if you're charged with a serious crime, to pay an attorney, you're going to get some apathetic, overworked public defender that is going to not ask you, are you innocent, not look into your case. You can't hire the private investigators that may be needed, and then is going to cut a deal with the prosecutor who's on the same payroll that the public defender is on, and that public defender is going to tell you how lucky you are that they cut a deal off of your already abbreviated life. It's got
right, which is how I believe. I believe the statistic is something like 92% of all criminal cases are plea bargained. Do you know if I'm remembering correctly? And most of that is because, exactly like you said, and most of that is because people don't have the resources to fight a case, and so they go, okay, well, 6 months in jail is better than risking 10 years, even though I'm completely innocent, but I can't prove it. So if those are my choices, I'll take the 6 months.
Oh, and it's horrific, Tom, because what it does is it destroys families, and it destroys families again, particularly among the people that you can take health statistics. You and I have had this conversation and talked about it before. Of all of the societal negatives in this country, as much as, listen, I wish it weren't so, there are black people. And so when you take a mother or a father out of a household, you have now set up a situation where there are generations that are going to be affected by that. And that's just got to change.
Yeah, I am totally with you. Brilliant. Thank you, Kenyatta. Always great to hear from you. Leslie in Central Square, New York. Leslie, you have the last minute. Leslie?
Yes.
No, Leslie. Okay, Leslie, you have the last 45 seconds.
Okay. All that stuff you said earlier that we want to do now won't be able to do nothing unless we get the brainwashing of the people not there no more, because them guys are just waiting for a new person to follow, and they're going to come right back on the scene, and it's going to be worse than it was with Trump. You got to stop the lying to the people. Otherwise, you ain't going nowhere with anything.
Yeah, Louise and I checked out Fox News last night, and it's breathtaking. I mean, it's astonishing the way that they just, spin reality, flip things upside down and inside out. It was just, for just in 10 minutes. I mean, I reached the point where I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight if we watch any more of this. Leslie, thank you. Spot on. I'm with you. Billionaire-owned media. Anyway, we're hitting the top of the hour here. We're going to be back on the other side of this with an absolutely fascinating conversation with our old buddy Michael Mann, one of the world's leading climate scientists. We're going to do a deep dive into who's behind climate denialism. This is going to be fascinating. You're going to love it. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Plexiderm, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. Gabby takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at gabby.com/Tom. HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com. Code TOM. And Superbeats, heart chews for heart-healthy energy. More info at superbeatsradio.com/Tom.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Health Justice Now, Single Payer and What Comes Next by Timothy Faust. And this is from the introduction. A secret scream rings through America. It rings down the sterile fluorescent hallways of our hospitals. It rings over our rural towns and our native reservations. It rings through our prisons, the bellies of our great cities. It rings in our farms and our fields, our streets and our sewers, our bodies and our blood. And we are cursed to never hear it clearly until at last we realize it has been our own mouth screaming and we are lost. A child born today inherits in that secret a new American squalor, the skeletal remains of the American cities, the bleached bones of the American suburbs. This secret is a birthright of continual exploitation, pumped for labor and drained of cash and then punished for the resulting suffering. Punished for being hungry, punished for being sick, punished for being pregnant, punished for being poor, punished for being black or brown, punished for being queer, for being unlucky, for being. At the base of that suffering is lodged a little truth, like a knot in the stomach. In America, sickness makes you poor, and poorness makes you sick. This is a book about that relationship and why it happens, and why it's unnecessary, and what we can do to fix it. The cosmic whirling of God's great slot machine has not determined that some people are fated to suffer while others flourish. We have the resources to take care of everyone, and yet we refuse to do so. Your medical debt and medical bills are unnecessary, but we have chosen to make them necessary. These are structural problems with structural causes, and many of them share roots in how we pay for health care. This is a book about health care and health finance. They are different. Healthcare is anything that helps you stay safe and healthy. It's a kind of freedom from and within your own body. Health finance is the method by which we as a country pay for that freedom and by which we decide who gets to have it and who doesn't. Healthcare is more than what happens to you in the hospital. Healthcare is whether your home makes you sick, or your food makes you sick, or your environment makes you sick, or whether you have enough money to afford the things that keep you healthy. In America, the structure of corporate health care has convinced us that some people deserve health care and some people don't. This is a book about that corporate health finance, about private insurance and private insurers. For half a century, they've convinced us that they're the only things that keep us or could ever keep us from the utter financial ruination of illness. They've sold us different inadequate insurance plans and persuaded us that this is a form of great liberty, while chipping away at our freedoms for profit and holding our bodies and our children's bodies hostage.
This is a book about single-payer healthcare, a health finance model in which we pool our abundant collective resources to provide healthcare to all people. It is a common model across the world. As we will discuss in this book, we have the potential not just to enact a single-payer program in America, but to build the greatest healthcare program among any so-called developed democracy. Here is my profession of faith. I believe beyond any doubt that single-payer is demonstrably sound and imminently feasible. I believe a properly ambitious and well-structured single-payer program will do more than any other American social program of this generation to soothe the burns, to resuscitate the spirit, to nourish the moral will of the American people. I believe it will loosen the loathsome manacles of American health finance, an exploitative institution that profits by plundering from us our own bodily autonomy, and that anchors a larger exploitation that holds those whom we love as captive leverage to guarantee our servitude to abusive employers or domestic partners, to those who seek to dominate us both in the office and in the hospital. I believe this nation owes its people, whose labor has created its rich banquet, the safety and agency of healthcare. I believe this healthcare is greater in scope than that which happens upon an operating table. I believe that housing, food, income, and more, the components of basic human dignity, are healthcare. And I believe our work is that of striving toward justice for all people. And I therefore believe, I have to believe, that single-payer healthcare is our moral imperative. Single-payer is our tool. Single-payer is our weapon. Single-payer is our first step. But single-payer on its own is not the goal. This book is about health justice. Healthcare is personal, so I want to start this book personally by introducing two friends of mine, Steve Way and Kyle Kolick. They're two guys about my age, I'm 30, who live in North New Jersey. They're sweet, gentle people, and probably the most charismatic pair of friends I've met in my entire life. They make me laugh until my face hurts, and we like watching pro wrestling together. They're also being utterly broken by our American healthcare system, and it's keeping them from living their lives. Steve has muscular dystrophy. The muscle and tissues that hold his body together are eating themselves. He's doing pretty good, all things considered. He beat his original life expectancy of 18, and now probably has a long life ahead of him. Steve needs a wheelchair to move and a ventilator to help him breathe. The book, Health Justice Now, Timothy Faust.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. It's always an honor and a pleasure to have one of the world's greatest climate scientists on this program, Dr. Michael Mann, the distinguished professor of meteorology, the director of the Earth System Science Center from Penn State University, member of the National Academy of Sciences, author of numerous books, The Madhouse Effect, How Climate Change Denial is Threatening Our Planet, Destroying Our Politics and Driving Us Crazy, recipient of the Tyler Prize, and he has a new book out. It's called The New Climate War. And this is breathtaking stuff. Dr. Mann, welcome back to the program. What stimulated you to write this book?
Well, thanks, Tom. It's always a pleasure to be with you, my friend. And, you know, the new climate war, what this is about is the challenges that we currently face. We're so close to achieving the action that we have sought for so long on climate. We can feel it, we can taste it, especially with this new administration that is making climate action part of their first 100 days agenda. Within the first day of the Biden administration, we saw two very important climate actions: rejoining the Paris Accord and blocking the Keystone XL pipeline. So we're so close, but we need to recognize that the forces of denial, the forces of inaction, I call them the inactivists, are still working hard to prevent us from making the needed transition away from fossil fuels. And look, they can no longer deny the basic evidence, the science, the impacts, because they're playing out in real time. We can see that now. And so They haven't stopped in their effort to thwart action, but they have now evolved. They've changed their tactics because they can't get away with denying the problem, but instead what they're trying to do is to deflect attention from the real solutions, the need to regulate carbon emissions. They're trying to divide the climate advocacy community, getting us fighting with each other, for example, over lifestyle choices, so that we don't represent a united front demanding action. They're putting out false solutions, and in fact, they're actually purveying doom and gloom. They are fanning the flames of doomism. Many, climate advocates of good intentions and goodwill have sort of fallen into despair, and they think it's too late to do anything about the problem. That's not true, but if you believe it's too late to do anything, that can lead you down the same path of inaction as outright denial. And so we have to be aware of the fact that the inactivists are sort of fanning the flames of doomism as well to lead us to despair, because they don't care about the path that you take to inaction, to disengagement. They just care about the destination.
So how organized is this? Who are these players? What did you find as you dug into this?
So we know, a lot of the usual suspects, fossil fuel groups, dark money organizations, the Koch brothers, lobbyists, fossil fuel lobbyists. They're out there using every means at their disposal to sort of distort our public discourse over climate change and to fan the flames once again of these various tactics. But we also have to be aware that there are state actors involved as well. And Russia has played, an unfortunately very prominent role in trying to disrupt efforts in other countries aimed at climate action. They've interfered with American politics. They've interfered with Canadian politics, with Australian politics. And they use bot armies and trolls online to foment discord and division. They get us fighting with each other. One of the ways they do that is by deflecting attention away from the needed systemic changes to individual behavior, as if it's all about just you and me, that's where the onus resides, rather than the overwhelming carbon footprint, which isn't ours, but it's the fossil fuel industry's footprint. So they like to distract us from that, make it all about us and our lifestyle choices, and then get us fighting and finger pointing with each other about our carbon purity, about our diet, our travel, etc. Yeah.
Right. So for example, it's been a few months, but I tweeted, some story about climate change that was calling for a carbon tax, and a number. I was surprised by how many. And I went back and looked, and many of them were. This was on Twitter. A number of these accounts had 5 followers. I mean, but I think they were bot accounts. They kept, over and over and over again. They were saying, "Well, what kind of car do you drive? And how many square feet in your house? And how come you're always on airplanes, Hartmann?" And it's like, how do you even respond to that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's very effective, right? Because they instigate the debate, the dissonance online. But then other, people, again, of good intentions get, caught up in it. They are victims of these efforts. They take the bait. They take the red meat. And so pretty soon, real people are shouting at each other and finger pointing and talking about, what you should be doing and why you're not doing everything you can. And you shouldn't be talking about policy solutions if you don't have your own personal house in order. It is a way of deflecting attention from the needed solutions and at the same time dividing us. It's a very clever strategy. And by the way, Tom, we have some friends who are opinion leaders in this space, like Leo DiCaprio, for example, who has really led the effort to create public awareness on the part of the public when it comes to the climate crisis. And they love to attack him, to misrepresent his lifestyle and his individual, behaviors, to try to discredit him as a hypocrite, right? Because if they can do that, then he's no longer as effective a messenger.
So the bottom line here, my understanding of how this how this works, in a macro sense, is that you and I can, buy electric cars and refuse to get on airplanes and keep our houses at 55 degrees and wear 5 sweaters all we want, but it's not going to save the world. What we need is action at the level of government. And what these people are trying to do is either focus us on individual actions and say this is the only thing that you should be thinking about, or even worse, saying the people who are telling you that government action is necessary are hypocrites because they're flying on jet airplanes or even private planes, for God's sake, when that's not the problem. The problem is that we don't have a carbon tax. Do I have that right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a threefer, as you've just pointed out. They accomplish 3 things at the same time. They deflect attention away from the needed policies, systemic solutions to individual behavior. They get us fighting with each other, so it's sort of a divide and conquer way of defeating the climate movement. And they tar some of our most important opinion leaders and communicators by painting them as hypocrites. And Leo DiCaprio is one. We both know him, and we know how earnest he is.
We both worked with him. Yeah.
But Al Gore and other leaders in that space, it's the same game. Yep.
And is this being funded by the fossil fuel industry, or is this being funded by other governments, the Saudi government, the Russian government, whatever, that are basically petrostates?
Yeah, so a lot of this really does come from the petrostates. Look, the fossil fuel interests and their front groups, they're doing a lot of these online ops as well. They're trying to divide us. They're using every means, at their disposal, and they are engaged in a massive information campaign. The Koch brothers, ALEC, and the Murdoch media empire, which works on their behalf. So those are important players, and they're working synergistically with state actors like Russia, like Saudi Arabia, that see fossil fuels as their greatest asset. They don't want us to get off the burning of fossil fuels.
Dr. Mann, I'd like to ask you how bad the environment is right now, and also specifically what we need to do to fix it. Can you stick around for a few minutes?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. We'll be right back with Dr. Michael Mann. His website, michaelmann.net. And you can tweet him at Michael E. Mann with 2 N's.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back with my conversation with Dr. Michael Mann. His new book, The New Climate War. So, Dr. Mann, how bad is it? Where are we at? We've obviously it's things are not rosy on the one hand, and on the other hand, we're not doomed. There's still time, and there are a lot of things we can do. Where in that middle ground are we as a nation and as a planet?
Yes,
I realize those are probably 2 separate answers.
Well, yeah, they're related because, we're much further down this highway than we ought to be. So that's, a fact. And we have already locked in certain impacts that are going to persist at least for decades. So much of the increased vulnerability that we have now to the effects of sea level rise, to unprecedented extreme weather events, the unprecedented floods and heat waves and wildfires and droughts and superstorms we've seen in recent years, some of that stuff is sort of locked in for the foreseeable future. If you are Puerto Rico, dangerous climate change has arrived. If you're California, dangerous climate change has arrived. If you're the Gulf Coast, dangerous climate change has arrived. The low-lying island nations of the world, and so on. We're already subject to some very damaging, very dangerous climate change. And so the key thing to recognize here is that we can prevent it from getting worse while keeping those changes within sort of our adaptive capacity. If we can prevent further warming and further worsening of many of these impacts, it will still be within our capacity to adapt and the capacity of other living things. But if we go too far down this highway, we start to contend with truly devastating, catastrophic, irreversible changes in our climate. So there is great urgency. There's no question about that. But as I point out in the book, and I point out in every interview that I do, there is great agency. There is still time to make sure we don't worsen the problem. And that's where there's a little bit of good news in the science of the past decade or so, where we now understand that if we stop burning carbon, we prevent the planet from warming up within a few years. So the temperatures actually stabilize within a few years of ceasing carbon emissions, which means there's a direct impact. There's a direct effect of the actions that we take today.
So, I mean, if we stop burning carbon, you're talking about the whole planet.
Yeah, so we used to think, Tom, that that the warming would persist for decades into the future, even if we stop burning carbon. And that's because of what we understood. The oceans continue to warm up in response to the carbon pollution that's already in the atmosphere. And the oceans have what we call thermal inertia. They're sluggish. So they do that for decades to come. And that's true. We call that committed warming. And that would take us towards warmer temperatures. But offsetting that is something else. If we stop burning carbon, then the oceans are still pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. The vegetation on land is pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. So CO2 levels start to come down if we stop burning carbon. That offsets this other effect, and you get a flat line. If you stop burning carbon now, surface temperatures flatten out within a few years.
That's great news. We'll be stick around, Dr. Mann. We'll be right back with Dr. Michael Mann, Distinguished Professor of Meteorology and the Director of the Earth System Science Center at Penn State University. He has a new book out, and you need to check it out. It's available wherever you find fine books. It's called The New Climate War. We'll be right back. You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and the essence of it is, I use a couple of examples. There's hundreds of them out there. In one case, Alabama is preparing to execute a man who was not guilty of the crime that he committed with a relatively high level of certainty, but still they're gonna kill this guy, an African American. And the other story out of New York State, where the police officers hogtied this guy, elbows behind him, tied his legs together, and then threw him down a flight of stairs, mangled his face. He looked he was totally beaten. 12 hours later, he commits suicide in his cell. How is it possible that our prisons do this kind of stuff? Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still legal in the United States. You have no rights if you've been convicted of a crime. We need to amend the Constitution. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. We're talking with Professor Michael Mann, and he has a new book out, The New Climate War. And Dr. Mann, we talked about how if the world were to stop burning carbon tomorrow, the impact would be fairly rapid. A positive impact would be fairly rapid. I don't think the world is going to stop burning carbon tomorrow, but we seem to be moving. Hopefully, we're moving in the right direction. What are the things in the 5 minutes here we have? What are the things that you would put at the top of the list, and how can people who are watching or listening to this program right now most effectively help those things come about?
Yeah, so, we can do those individual behavioral changes that we talked about. That all makes things better. So we should be better environmental stewards and decrease our personal carbon footprint. Often it makes us healthier, saves us money, makes us feel better. Let's do all those things, but let us not fall into the trap of thinking that individual action is somehow a substitute for the changes that only our elected leaders can make, instituting policies that incentivize the collective shift away from fossil fuel burning. Now, the good news, Tom, here is that, we are looking at a new day. We have an incoming administration that just yesterday set the tone. First day in office, the Biden administration demonstrated their commitment to climate action by blocking the Keystone XL pipeline, by engaging with the international community, signing back on to the Paris Accord. And that's all good. Those are good first steps, but we have to go much beyond that. And we have to keep the pressure on even those we view as our friends, politicians that we perceive as being in support of climate action. There are huge, powerful interests still out there trying to work the refs, trying to make sure that that these policymakers don't do what's necessary to decarbonize our civilization. And we have to keep the pressure on ourselves. So we have to use our voices in every way possible. Voting is important, and we used our vote to reposition ourselves in a place where we can now see some climate action. But we have to keep the pressure on. Biden administration is doing some good things. But look, we're going to have a 50-50 Senate, a closely divided Senate, and we need climate legislation. It can't just be executive actions by the administration. And they're doing a lot, and they're incorporating climate action into every single agency, every single cabinet position. So that's great. But executive action alone isn't enough. We need policies that will quickly decarbonize our society. And that means we need to get climate legislation through a 50-50 Senate. We're going to have to put pressure on conservative Democrats and on moderate Republicans, so we can not only get a climate bill onto the Senate floor, which will happen now under a Democratic majority leader, but that we can actually pass climate legislation. And I think we can do it. And that's what we need to focus on within the next couple of years.
So back in the 1980s, we had a real crisis around the world, actually, but here in the United States as well, where buildings and monuments were literally crumbling because of sulfur dioxide, which was getting into our atmosphere and combining, you know the physics of this better than I, but my understanding is, combining with oxygen or carbon dioxide or something, turning into basically sulfuric acid and raining down on us. And George Herbert Walker Bush, the Republican president, put into place a cap and trade program where there was essentially a tax on the emissions of sulfur dioxide that companies could trade back and forth, but over time it became more and more and more expensive to emit this stuff, basically a sulfur dioxide tax. Is a carbon tax the number one thing on your list, something like that? Because we solved that problem.
Yeah, and that was actually a cap and trade system. It was implemented by George H.W. Bush's EPA administrator, William K. Riley. He was sort of an environmental hero. He went on to be a climate activist, headed up a climate non-governmental organization after he left the EPA. And so it shows you can even get progress, or at least in the past could, under Republican administrations if you had people of good faith working together. And those market mechanisms, should it be a cap and trade system? Should it be a carbon tax? And if so, how do we implement it so that it's progressive? We don't want frontline communities, those, with the least resources, low-income families and individuals. We don't want them to bear the brunt of this. They're the ones who are actually bearing the brunt of climate change impacts. And it would be a double whammy to make them pay the most for doing something about it. So it has to be done in a just way. And Canada is doing that. Australia had a carbon pricing system, an emissions trading scheme, somewhere between cap and trade and a carbon tax, that actually ended up leading to more income for low-income families and individuals because it was a progressive pricing policy where the revenue was returned preferentially to low-income earners. And we can do something like that here.
Yeah, it's just going to require the political will. Read all about it. The new book is The New Climate War by Dr. Michael Mann. Dr. Mann, it is always an honor and a pleasure to have you. Thanks so much for dropping by, my friend.
Thank you. The honor and pleasure is mine, my friend.
Okay. Dr. Michael Mann, The New Climate War is the book. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls right after the break. Oh, and Karl Rove was offended. I got to tell you about this. It's kind of sad, really.
Recording.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Age of Illusions, How America Squandered Its Cold War Victory by Andrew Bacevich. This is from the introduction. Without the Cold War, what's the point of being an American? Henry Rabbit Angstrom, novelist John Updike's late 20th century everyman, posed that question just as the long twilight struggle was winding down. More than a quarter of a century later, Rabbit's plaintive query still awaits a definitive answer. Indeed, the passage of time has only sown confusion about whether there is a point to being an American. Even as the Cold War was ending, Updike's surrogate was not alone in feeling it a loss. By the 1980s, the Cold War had become more than a mere situation or circumstance. It was a state of mind. As had Rabbit, most Americans had come to take its existence for granted. Like the polar ice cap or baseball's status as the national pastime, it had acquired an appearance of permanence, so its passing caught Rabbit's fellow citizens unawares. Those charged with managing the Cold War were, if anything, even more surprised. The enterprise to which they had devoted their professional lives had suddenly vanished. Here was a contingency that the sprawling U.S. national security apparatus, itself a product of the anti-communist crusade, had failed to anticipate. At one level, of course, the surprise could not have been more gratifying. In the epic competition against pitting West against East, the God-fearing against the godless, and democracy against totalitarianism, our side had won. All-out nuclear war had been averted. The cause of freedom, which Americans felt certain they themselves embodied, had prevailed. Victory was decisive, sweeping, and unequivocal. In another sense, however, the passing of the Cold War could not have been more disorienting. In 1987, a senior advisor to Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev had warned, "We are going to do a terrible thing to you. We are going to deprive you of an enemy." As the Soviet Union passed out of existence, Americans were left not just without that enemy, but without even a framework for understanding the world and their place in it. However imperfectly, the Cold War had, for several decades, offered a semblance of order and coherence. The collapse of communism shattered that framework. Where there had been purposefulness and predictability, now there was neither. Winning the Cold War brought Americans face to face with a predicament comparable to that confronting the lucky fellow who wins the Mega Millions lottery. Hidden within an apparent windfall is the potential for monumental disaster. Putting that windfall to good use while avoiding the pitfalls inherent in suddenly acquiring riches calls for prudence and self-awareness. Not easily demonstrated when the big house, luxury car, and vacation condo you've always wanted are yours for the asking. Similarly, the end of the Cold War might have given Americans pause, especially since the issues at hand were of considerably greater significance than homes, cars, and condos. At least in theory, the moment might have invited reflection on some first-order questions. What is the meaning of freedom? What does freedom allow? What obligations does it impose? Whom or what does it exclude? Of course, Americans had been wrestling with such questions since well before 1776, their answers evolving over time. During the several decades of the Cold War, however, the exigencies of the East-West rivalry had offered a reason to throttle down impulses to explore America's furthermost boundaries, or freedom's furthermost boundaries. Except on the fringes of American politics, most citizens accepted the word from Washington that their way of life was under grave threat. In the pecking order of national priorities, addressing that threat, defending freedom rather than enlarging it, tended to take precedence over other considerations. This is not to suggest that Cold War Americans were a complicated lot. They were not. From the 1950s, misleadingly enshrined as a decade of conformity, through the Reagan-dominated 1980s, domestic crises and controversies were constants. Among the issues energizing or enraging Americans were civil liberties, the nuclear arms race, mismanaged wars of dubious provenance, challenges to artistic tradition, left-wing and right-wing radicalism, crass materialism, that coexisted with widespread poverty and a host of simmering issues connected to race, sex, and gender. Yet through it all, an uncommon outlook centered on resistance to the red threat endured. For most citizens, most of the time, the Cold War itself was sufficient to explain the point of being an American. The collapse of the Soviet Empire between 1989 and 1991 robbed that outlook of its last vestiges of authority. Rarely, if ever, had the transition from one historical period to another occurred quite so abruptly, with such a precise set of demarcations, and with such profound implications. As if in an instant, the discipline that the Cold War had imposed vanished. The absurdity of defining reality as an either-or choice, red or dead, slave or free, good versus evil, now became blazingly apparent. The impact on American ambitions and expectations was akin to removing the governor from an internal combustion engine. Suddenly the throttle opened up. The future appeared equally promising, offering Americans a seemingly endless array of choices, while confronting them with few evident constraints. Everything seemed possible. Confident that an era of unprecedented U.S. economic, military, and cultural ascendancy now beckoned, members of an intoxicated elite threw caution to the winds. The book, The Age of Illusion, by Andrew Bacevich.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. So we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who support our program, and there's a really troubling concatenation of events, events, that are happening in the United States right now. We created these concentration camps for refugees seeking asylum. This was Stephen Miller's big project. And we've got concentration camps for children, concentration camps for male adults, concentration camps for female adults. And now we've got this virus sweeping through the United States, and people are starting to die in these concentration camps, which has provoked ICE or whoever's running them to deport hundreds of the children back to the countries that they came from without their parents, which is mind-boggling, and in many cases carrying disease. This is serious stuff, and we need to be talking about it. The new video is over at thomhartmann.com. Okay, poor Karl Rove. He goes into the snowflake category, I guess. This was, this is so sad. He said that, it was okay. President Biden's speech was an okay speech, except that he had to mention racism. And that's where it just kind of fell apart, according to Karl Rove. Yeah, because the Republican Party would never embrace racism. I mean, it's just not part of their day. It's the party of Lincoln, don't you know? It's mind-boggling. Anyhow, let's pick up some of your phone calls here. Bill in Sandusfield, Massachusetts. Am I saying that right, Bill?
Yes, you are. Yeah,
what's up?
You talked about three issues. Health, farming, and climate can all be dealt with in part by regenerative agriculture, which is keeping the soil covered with growing plants and biodiversity. A community of plants is stronger than a monoculture, just like a diverse community working together, as Biden said, works better for justice and solving our problems. And healthy soil makes for healthy eaters because the food is more nutrient dense. And this will solve the rural voter issue for Democrats. I was back and forth with my Trump-supporting siblings, and the one issue they agree with me on is this one, that we need to get farmers off of the pesticide and chemical fertilizer treadmill, and peer pressure is keeping them on it, and salespeople for those industries are keeping them on it. But there are farmers that are succeeding, and I wanted to mention a few names. Gabe Brown, he's a rancher in North Dakota. John Kemp, he's a Amish farmer in Ohio. And Dan Kittredge in Massachusetts. And Dr. David Johnson in New Mexico State, he's a microbiologist. So they're all working at it from different angles. But essentially, we're sequestering carbon in the soil, we're making healthier food, and we're helping farmers succeed financially. So, and it's a way that the Democrats can finally take back the rural vote by really helping farmers, and the farmers will see when the Democrats embrace this. And I think Hightower had a little clip on your program about the Secretary of Agriculture, and Tom Vilsack has been pretty much bought into the agribusiness model. There may be some hope with him, but someone like Dr. David Johnson's wife, Hui Chun Soo, would also solve the problem of not quite enough East Asian Americans in the cabinet. That's sort of one group that's missing. Indian.
Bill, is what you're talking about here what's often referred to? I'm familiar with the concept of regenerative agriculture, but under that rubric, are you including no-till agriculture?
Yes, no-till, but not no-till without pesticides.
So, do you know if anybody has done that at scale?
Well, Gabe Brown is doing it in ranching, and
but ranching doesn't typically involve tilling anyway. I'm talking about people who are using no plow, no till agriculture to do 1,000 acres. I mean, I get it. Small organic farms, it's wonderful, right? We buy from them every week, but at scale.
Well, there are methods of working at scale, scaling it up. Who's that guy who we interviewed? Yeah, I'm talking to my wife. I'm trying to remember who we interviewed on the radio. I can see his face. If you go to Acres USA, there are a number of people doing it on a bigger scale. Land, he's in Ohio. Okay. What's his name?
I'll check it out, Bill.
John Brandt. Yeah, John Brandt. Yeah, check it out. There are people doing it on a larger scale.
Great.
And lots of people,
Bill,
and they're teaching other people.
No, I got it. Bill, thank you very much. Don in Durant, Oklahoma. Hey, Don, what's on your mind?
Yes, sir. You know how they got the minimum wage at $7.49 or what it is? They're wanting to increase it to $10 or $15 an hour. I was wondering if they could make a law that would have a maximum wage. Say the lowest wage earner of that company makes $15 an hour, that the people that run that company could only make 100% more than the minimum wage earner. Or maybe they might even make 1,000% more, or even 10,000% more. But it has some kind of maximum wage where if they wanted to make more money, they would have to raise the minimum wage.
Well, we had something like that. It wasn't tied to the minimum wage, but we had something like that right up until the mid-1980s when Ronald Reagan dropped the top tax bracket down below 50%. It used to be that you would reach a point where you were paying more of your income as taxes than you were taking home, and that was pretty much the point at which people maxed out their own wages. There was a reason why the heads of the big industrial companies never paid themselves more than $3 million a year prior to the 1980s. And it was because once they went over $3 million a year, their income was taxed to 74%. And who wants to do that? So they just left the money in the company and paid their workers better and used that money for R&D to develop new products. So effectively, a top tax bracket that has a tax rate that's well over 50% becomes a maximum wage. That tax bracket, the bottom end of that tax bracket, essentially defines the maximum wage, to use your term, Don. Interesting historical tidbit here, by the way. At the time of the American Revolution, there was a maximum wage law in England, but it didn't apply to management. It only applied to working people. And the reason why was they had the conservatives who ran England in the 1700s had the same concern that the conservatives who want to run America have, which is what happens if the middle class gets big enough and strong enough that they start demanding a piece of the action. This is what Russell Kirk predicted in 1951. Let me just finish my rant here.
Okay.
This is what Russell Kirk predicted in 1951. He said if the middle class gets wealthy enough, they will stop basically being compliant sheep. And you will start seeing minority groups within the middle class emerging and demanding their rights. Specifically, young people will stop doing what their parents tell them to do. Women will stop doing what their husbands tell them to do. Racial minorities will start demanding equality, and gender minorities will start demanding equality, and that will lead to the destruction of society. So in the 60s, when the middle class actually got that wealthy, that young people felt that they could go out and protest in the streets without fear of losing their college education because they were massively in debt. When workers were willing to strike, when women were, quote, burning their bras, the women's movement, when African Americans and Martin Luther King and others were leading a civil rights movement, that was the moment at which the conservatives in America in the 60s and 70s said, holy crap, Russell Kirk was absolutely right. We've got to destroy the middle class. And that was Reagan's mission, and he did that. 10 years ago, after 30 years of Reaganomics, we finally hit the point where fewer than half of Americans are middle class. But the old maximum wage law in England was you can take all the money out of your own company that you want, but your workers may not be paid more than, $8 an hour. And that goal was the same. Keep the working class impoverished, because if they get wealthy enough, they represent the threat of revolution. To you, Don.
So you're just saying that we need to go back to the tax bracket that before Reagan that would kind of create a new minimum wage. Okay, that makes sense. I understand that.
It was 91% up until 1960. I think 67 was the year that LBJ dropped it down to 74%. And then it was 74% right up until around 82, 83 when Reagan dropped it. And anytime the top tax bracket is at a rate that's above 50%, what you find is that not a lot of people will take so much income that they end up in that bracket. There are other ways to use the money than just giving it to the government. And it's a simplistic thing, but it really worked well for the United States. It stabilized our it absolutely does, and it works. And by the way, we're not the only country to do this. Most of your European countries have top tax brackets that are slightly over 50%. In Denmark, I think it's 58%. I think it's 54% in Germany. I'm just pulling these numbers from memory. They fact check me on these. But typically, in the countries where you have stable economies and a strong working class, a strong middle class, you have a top tax bracket that has a rate that's over 50%. Don, thanks a lot for the call. Keep thinking. You're on to something here. Yep, good talking to you. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option. And welcome back. Steve in Albany, New York. Hey, Steve, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
It's Albany, Oregon, by the way, Tom. First-time caller. And did
I say Albany, New York? It's Albany, Oregon, right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Steve, for calling.
Right. Yes. The part of your show that really gripped me today was the mental health part of your show. And there are so many people that are so mentally ill at the moment. And I, for one, have been suffering from it. But one of the things that you suggested to do was to go for a 20-minute walk. And I couldn't agree more. I think that's one of the healthiest things to do. But I'm paralyzed. And
ouch.
Unfortunately, due to, I'm not quite sure what, but actually an outfit called Prof, which I've been fighting for several years now, in every committee meeting and every meeting that I've been to, probably about 15 or 20. And they're constantly trying to take away the medicine that made people like me have a quality of life. And I'm wondering if you have some sort of suggestion of what I can do to be more effective fighting against these people that in fact, I was told by some of them, well, this is a right to die state. You can always just die. And I told them, I'm like, look, I want to live. I want life with dignity, not death with dignity. So I'm really kind of like ultra confused right now because the worst vote I ever made was death with dignity in Oregon. And I only did it because of Terry Schiavo in Florida and the way the Senate tried to get involved in that end-of-life situation. But the way that they're treating it in Oregon is altogether different. It feels like they're trying to purge people like me.
Well, I would be surprised by that, Steve, but you've raised a whole bunch of different topics here in this. Number one, if you're talking about government benefits or anything that you want from the government, I would strongly suggest that you call your
the government.
Okay. Number two, if you are asking about techniques that can be used, psychologically to improve psychological health and well-being, the excerpt that you heard, the book report that you heard, was from my book, Walking Your Blues Away, and it's based on EMDR and NLP, mostly EMDR. Francine Shapiro sort of invented this thing called eye motion desensitization and reintegration. And there are therapists and psychologists who practice EMDR all over the country and all over Oregon, and you should be able to find one who can work with you on that. As to the whole, it's a right to die state. Unless your doctor is telling you to commit suicide, I don't get that. Steve, I'm sorry, I'm out of time. I got to run, but thank you for the call. It is coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. We have a new video over at thomhartmann.com for the people who support our program, and it's an interesting one. The phrase, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, has a really interesting history, and the exploitation of that phrase and that history by right-wingers in 20th century America, or late 20th century America, now 21st century America, also has a fascinating and rather grim history. Just the general absurdity of the idea that somebody can lift themselves off the ground by reaching down and pulling on a strap on their boots. Just think about it for a second. But it's used, this is used as justification by right-wingers, particularly over the last 40 years since the Reagan Revolution, to say, poor people, their poverty is their own fault. Check it out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Aaron in Carmichael, California. Hey, Aaron, what's on your mind?
Okay, so I had an idea because I was thinking about how Joe Biden just got inaugurated. I think what would be best is if we got through, he tackled the coronavirus, and he left the Trump tax cuts alone except for to incentivize renewable energy, which you had a good guest on, that professor. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But the reason is
Mann.
because of the doubling of the standard deduction.
Okay.
That makes
Explain
sense.
it.
What I'm saying, so I'm saying, so for married couples, it's I think 24,800, if I can't remember my numbers exactly, and it's like 13,000 or so for singles. And if they are able to have that standard deduction to knock that amount of income off their their adjusted gross income, they would effectively be paying lower taxes. So I think that would be a good idea, just because we need to see how things turn out, because there's going to be all these lost jobs forever. For like a year. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Well, yeah, and when George W. Bush wanted to stimulate the economy, his solution, and Donald Trump, who was a big advocate of this too, their solution was stop collecting Social Security taxes. Right. Which, of course, kneecapped Social Security, which was a major mission of George W. Bush. Ran for Congress as a congressman from Texas in 1978 on the platform of ending Social Security, and he didn't get elected. He lost that election. Surprise, surprise. But it's been a mission his entire life, and Donald Trump. So, in fact, pretty much all of the right-wing billionaires and multimillionaires, like the Bush family and like the Trump family, are opposed to Social Security. So they always want to take a bite out of Social Security. But your point of raising the standard deduction would have largely the same impact, particularly if you adjusted the wage deduction tables. If the IRS, adjusted those tables immediately, it would have that same impact of stimulating, giving low-income people more money right away, and stimulating the economy. So yeah, spot on. I salute your idea, Aaron. Thank you. Brian in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Hey, Tom. You've been talking about ways to revitalize the economy. I have one that wouldn't even involve passing any new laws. Just start using the German Antitrust Act. Yeah. I am with you. And the Clayton Antitrust Act of the 19-teens, I think it was, 1918, and the either 1956 or 1957 Antitrust Act. There have been 3 major revisions of it over the years, and then a whole bunch of minor ones. And they basically, what happened was in either 82 or 83, I forget which, it's in one of my books, Reagan directed his Justice Department and his Commerce Department to simply stop enforcing the antitrust laws. And that led to this explosion, the mergers and acquisitions mania. Yeah, and so just start enforcing the damn laws. I am totally with you, Brian. That's spot on. Brilliant. Have a good one. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. Alfredo in Mountain View, California. Hey, Alfredo. Animal agriculture?
Yes, Tom. According to the United Nations panel of scientists on climate change, they say that about 51% or so of all the greenhouse gases emitted into the atmosphere are caused by animal agriculture.
I didn't know it was that high. I know it's huge, though. It's absolutely massive. And it's not just animal agriculture. It's animal agriculture the way we do it, intensive animal agriculture. Because we're feeding animals, cows and pigs in particular, food that they are not designed to digest. And as a consequence, they're producing enormous amounts of methane. Plus, you've got all the carbon footprint of growing the soybeans and corn and grains that we're feeding to these animals that evolution didn't design to eat grains in the first place. And then you've got all the water that goes along with that. So yeah, I'm totally with you on that, Alfredo. If everybody in the country was to just, even you don't even have to give up meat. Just cut it down to 1 or 2 days a week. And you will have an impact. Now, again, we don't want to make the mistake of thinking that our own personal choices are the things that's going to save the world. It's going to help, but we have to have, policy changes. And at that, I would say we should be regulating animal agriculture in ways that discourage it. Alfredo, thank you. That was excellent. Gary in Atlanta, Georgia. Gary, you got the last minute. What's up?
I got a quick question. Can Joe Biden use his executive power to open up Medicare for all, and anybody who wants to be a part of that system could give their money to the government instead of to insurance companies?
He can't, because it's law. You have to alter the law. If the law provided the Social Security Administration or Medicare Administration the power to come up with their own rules, then you could do it, but you can't do it the way the law is written right now. It should be high on everybody's list, Gary, and that's a good one. Thank you, Gary, very much for the call, and thanks for watching us down there in Atlanta. Thank you for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. Congressman Ro Khanna will be with us for the second hour of the program, taking your calls, and otherwise it's going to be Anything Goes Friday. And boy, do we have a lot to talk about, eh?
We'll see you tomorrow. In the meantime, don't forget democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. So get out there, get active, tag You're It, and get over to thomhartmann.medium.com too. And let me know what you think about the writings I've been doing the last couple of weeks. I got about 2 weeks worth of work up there. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The ransacking.
These are CB Distillery. CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Plexiderm, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. Gabby takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at gabby.com/Tom. HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. And Superbeats, heart chews for heart healthy energy. More info at superbeatsradio.com/Tom.
We say